My husband kept a bikini photo of his best friend in his wallet. I kept his house as payback. I was doing laundry last month when my husband Blake's wallet fell out of his jeans. Cash and cards went everywhere. When I picked everything up, this photo fell out from behind his license. It wasn't me or our kids. It was his best friend Jenna from college. Not a group photo, not a casual pic. It was just her, smiling at the camera in a bikini from their recent beach trip. The one I wasn't invited to because it was a college friends thing, even though spouses went. When Blake got home, I asked him about it. He laughed and said I was being insecure, that lots of people keep friend photos in their wallets. I asked how many of his guy friends' photos he had. He called me crazy and slept on the couch to punish me for accusing him. The next morning, Jenna called during breakfast. Blake put her on speaker without asking. She was crying about some guy ghosting her. Blake spent 40 minutes comforting her while our kids' eggs got cold. When I pointed to the food, he waved me off and walked to another room. Our 5-year-old asked why Daddy always talks to Jenna instead of us. That stung. Then I noticed their daily routine. Jenna would text him at 6 a.m. before he even opened his eyes. They'd have entire conversations while I was right there in bed. She'd send selfies asking if she looked cute. He'd respond with heart emojis. When I said it was inappropriate, Blake said I didn't understand friendship because I was too possessive. He actually said maybe if I had friends like Jenna, I'd be less clingy. They had lunch together every Tuesday and Thursday. When I asked to join once, Jenna texted Blake later saying she felt like I was trying to interfere with their bond. Blake told me I needed to apologize for making her uncomfortable. I refused. He didn't talk to me for 3 days. Our anniversary came up. Blake forgot. But that same week, he threw Jenna a massive birthday party at an expensive restaurant. Spent $800 on her gift. Some designer purse she'd mentioned once. My birthday 2 months earlier, he got me a gift card to Target. At the party, Jenna sat on Blake's lap for a photo. When I said that was weird, everyone looked at me like I was the problem. Blake's mom pulled me aside and said I needed to be more secure in my marriage. The breaking point started when Jenna got dumped again. She called Blake sobbing at 2 a.m. on a work night. He actually got dressed and drove to her apartment. Came back at 6 a.m. saying she needed support. Our daughter had a fever that same night. He didn't even know because he was gone. Jenna started coming over every day after that. She'd walk in without knocking, go straight to the fridge, complain about what I cooked. She told Blake I was feeding the kids too much processed food while she made herself a sandwich with my groceries. Blake agreed with her and said I should learn from Jenna since she was so health conscious. She started buying Blake clothes because she said I didn't know his style. Threw out ties I'd gotten him for Christmas right in front of me. Blake wore everything she bought and thanked her for understanding him. When I found them looking at apartments online together, Blake said Jenna needed his help finding a place closer to us. The listing they were viewing was a 2-bedroom. For just her. He said the second room was for when she had guests. Then why were they measuring to see if Blake's desk would fit? I started getting suspicious about their beach trip months earlier. Blake's cousin Ray was there. After some wine, Ray admitted that everyone on the trip thought Blake and Jenna were together. They shared a hotel room to save money while actual couples paid for separate rooms. Ray said Jenna wore Blake's shirts the whole weekend, and they disappeared together multiple times. When I confronted Blake, he said Ray was stirring drama, and I was pathetic for believing gossip. Jenna started planning Blake's birthday party without asking me. Sent invitations from her email. People asked if we'd separated since his girlfriend was planning his party. When I told her to back off, she cried to Blake that I was bullying her. Blake said I was ruining his birthday with my jealousy. He actually asked me to skip the party so Jenna could enjoy herself. I went anyway. Jenna gave a 20-minute speech about their friendship. Inside jokes nobody understood, and memories from college. She ended it saying Blake was her soulmate, and some bonds transcend typical relationships. Everyone clapped uncomfortably. Blake hugged her for a solid minute. The next day, Jenna announced she needed to move in with us. I stood there frozen watching Blake nod along while Jenna explained which bedroom would work best for her. She was gesturing toward the hallway like she already lived here. My hands started shaking so badly I had to clench them into fists. I mumbled something about needing the bathroom and walked away before I screamed at both of them. Inside the bathroom, I locked the door and turned on the fan as loud as it would go. My phone was already in my hand as I scrolled to Fiona's number. She picked up on the second ring. I was crying so hard I could barely get the words out. Jenna wanted to move in. Blake was acting like this was totally normal. Fiona didn't even let me finish explaining before she cut me off and told me to pack a bag right now and come to her place. She said I didn't have to stay there and listen to this insanity. I splashed cold water on my face and took 3 deep breaths. When I came out, Blake and Jenna were sitting on the couch together looking at something on his phone. Probably floor plans for how to rearrange my house for her. I walked straight up to Blake and told him we needed to talk privately, away from Jenna. He looked annoyed, but he followed me to our bedroom. I closed the door and turned to face him. I told him absolutely not. Jenna was not moving into our family home. Blake's face went red immediately. He said I was being unreasonable. Jenna was going through a hard time and needed support from her best friend. I asked him if he was serious right now. He said completely serious, and that I needed to be more understanding. The argument got louder fast. I was practically yelling that his best friend had been acting like his wife for months, and I was done pretending this was normal. Blake called me jealous and controlling. He said I was trying to destroy his most important friendship. I told him his most important relationship should be with his actual wife and children. He laughed at that. Actually laughed. Blake stormed out of the bedroom and I heard him in the living room telling Jenna everything was fine. He was apologizing for my behavior. Apologizing to her. I stood there for a minute just staring at our bed. Then I grabbed my suitcase from the closet. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I threw clothes into the bag. T-shirts and jeans and underwear all mixed together. I didn't care about folding anything. I just needed to get out of this house. I grabbed the kids' backpacks from their rooms and started filling those too. My daughter's favorite stuffed animal, my son's blanket, toothbrushes from the bathroom. When I came out dragging 2 suitcases and 2 backpacks, Blake's eyes went wide. He asked what I was doing. I told him I was taking the kids to Fiona's house for a few days because I needed space to think. Jenna jumped up from the couch and actually tried to hug me. She said she hoped I felt better soon. Like I was the one with the problem. Like I was sick or something. I pulled away from her and went to get the kids from the playroom. They were confused about why we were leaving. My daughter asked if we were going on a trip. I said we were going to stay with Aunt Fiona for a little while. She asked if Jenna was moving into her room, and I had to bite my lip hard to keep from crying as I buckled her into her car seat. Blake stood in the driveway watching us load up. He looked confused. Actually confused. Like he genuinely could not understand why I was upset. I backed out without saying anything else to him. The drive to Fiona's took 20 minutes. The kids asked questions the whole way, but I couldn't focus on answering them. My brain felt fuzzy. When we pulled up, Fiona was already standing on her porch waiting. She must have been watching for us. She helped me get the kids and bags inside. The kids went straight to her TV room where she had a movie ready for them. Fiona led me to the kitchen and put the kettle on for tea. Then she just let me cry. I sat at her kitchen table with my face in my hands and sobbed for 20 minutes straight. When I finally stopped, Fiona asked what I wanted to do next. I told her I didn't know. I knew I couldn't go back to that house with things the way they were. But I didn't know what came after that. Fiona nodded and poured the tea. My phone started buzzing in my pocket around 8 that night. Blake. I let it go to voicemail. Then he called again. And again. I looked at the texts piling up. Some said he was sorry. Some said I overreacted. One said Jenna left crying because of how I treated her and that I owed her an apology. I turned my phone off and put it in a drawer. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I took the kids to the school like normal so they wouldn't miss anything. Then I drove back to Fiona's and sat at her kitchen table staring at my cold coffee. Fiona sat down across from me and suggested I talk to a lawyer, just to understand my options, even if I wasn't ready to make any decisions yet. The word lawyer made my stomach drop. That made everything feel real in a way it hadn't before. But Fiona was right. I needed to at least know what my options were. I spent the rest of the day on Fiona's laptop looking up divorce attorneys in the area. My eyes started hurting after the first hour, but I kept scrolling through websites and reading reviews. Most of the lawyers charged consultation fees between $200 and $300 just to talk for an hour. I didn't have that kind of money sitting around. Blake handled most of our finances and I had access to our joint account, but taking money out for a divorce lawyer felt wrong somehow, like it would give him ammunition to use against me later. I kept searching until I found an attorney named Miranda Chamberlain, whose website said she offered free initial consultations for family law cases. Her reviews were good and she had been practicing for 15 years. I stared at her phone number on the screen for a solid 10 minutes before I finally called and scheduled an appointment for the next day at 2 in the afternoon. The receptionist asked what the consultation was regarding, and I had to say the word divorce out loud for the first time. It felt heavy coming out of my mouth. That evening around 7, I was helping the kids with a puzzle on Fiona's living room floor when someone started pounding on the front door. Fiona went to answer it, and I heard Blake's voice immediately. He was demanding to talk to me, and his tone made my stomach clench. Fiona told him I wasn't ready to talk right now, but he pushed past her into the house. I stood up from the puzzle as he came into the living room. His face was red and he looked like he hadn't slept. He started talking before I could say anything. He said I was being dramatic and ridiculous, and that we needed to come home right now because the kids needed stability. He actually said stability like he cared about that when he'd been running off to comfort Jenna at all hours for months. I looked at Blake standing there in Fiona's living room, acting like he had any right to demand anything from me. The kids were watching us from the floor, and I didn't want them to see this, but I also couldn't let him keep talking to me like that. I told him the kids needed a father who put them first, instead of running to comfort his best friend at 2 in the morning while his daughter had a fever at home. Blake's face went from red to almost purple, and he said that wasn't fair. He said I was twisting everything to make him look bad. Fiona stepped between us and told Blake he needed to leave right now or she was calling the police. Her voice was calm but firm, and she had her phone already in her hand. Blake looked at her, and then at me, and then at the kids still sitting on the floor with puzzle pieces in their hands. He turned and walked out without another word. We heard his car start up and drive away a minute later. After Blake left, I tried to get the kids back to the puzzle, but they weren't interested anymore. Fiona made them hot chocolate and put on a movie in her den. I sat on the couch feeling shaky and sick. About 20 minutes later, my daughter came out of the bedroom where she was supposed to be sleeping. She was holding her stuffed rabbit and her eyes looked wet. She climbed up on the couch next to me and asked if Daddy loved Jenna more than us. The question hit me so hard I couldn't breathe for a second. My heart felt like it was breaking into actual pieces inside my chest. I pulled her onto my lap and held her tight. I told her that Mommy was going to make sure everything was okay, even though I had absolutely no idea how I was going to do that. She cried into my shoulder and I cried into her hair, and Fiona came and sat with us until my daughter finally fell asleep. The next day, I dropped the kids at the school and drove to Miranda Chamberlain's office. It was in a small building downtown with her name on a brass plate next to the door. The waiting room had comfortable chairs and magazines and a receptionist who smiled at me when I checked in. I sat there for 10 minutes feeling like I might throw up. When Miranda came out to get me, she was younger than I expected, maybe late 30s, with short dark hair and a no-nonsense handshake. She led me back to her office and gestured to a chair across from her desk. She asked me to tell her why I was there, and I started talking. She took notes while I explained about the bikini photo and the daily texts and the forgotten anniversary and the $800 purse. She asked questions about our finances and the house and Blake's relationship with Jenna. When I mentioned that the house came from my grandmother's inheritance and was only in my name, her eyebrows went up. She made a note and underlined it twice. Miranda put down her pen and looked at me directly. She explained that because the house was my separate property from before the marriage, Blake had no legal claim to it at all. If we got divorced, I would keep the house and Blake would have to leave. The information hit me like someone had punched me in the stomach, but in a good way. I had power here that I didn't even know I had. Miranda kept talking, and I tried to focus on her words. She said that in our state, property owned before marriage or inherited during marriage stays with the original owner unless it gets mixed with marital property. Since I'd kept the house in only my name and we'd never refinanced or anything like that, it was completely mine. Blake would have no right to it or to any of its value. I told Miranda everything else I could think of. The Target gift card for my birthday while Jenna got designer purses. The shared hotel room on the beach trip that I wasn't invited to. Jenna's speech at Blake's birthday party calling him her soulmate while everyone watched uncomfortably. Miranda wrote it all down and said it showed a clear pattern of Blake prioritizing Jenna over the marriage. She used the term emotional abandonment and said we could use that if we went to court. She explained that emotional affairs were harder to prove than physical ones, but the pattern of behavior I was describing was pretty obvious. The money he spent on Jenna while neglecting me. The time he spent with her while ignoring the kids. The 2 a.m. visits when our daughter was sick. It all added up to a husband who had checked out of his marriage. Miranda leaned back in her chair and laid out my options in a way that felt both scary and clear. She said I could try marriage counseling if I wanted to save the relationship. Some couples did manage to work through this kind of thing if both people were willing to change. But she also said I could file for divorce and would likely get primary custody of the kids given Blake's pattern of leaving them to attend to Jenna. She said the choice was completely mine, but I should think carefully about what I wanted my life to look like going forward. Did I want to spend years trying to compete with Jenna for my own husband's attention? Or did I want to build a life where I didn't have to do that anymore? She didn't push me either way, but her questions made me really think about what I wanted. I drove back to Fiona's house in a daze. For the first time in months, I felt like I could actually breathe all the way. Just knowing I had options and legal standing made me feel less trapped. I wasn't stuck in this situation with no way out. I had a house in my name and a lawyer who understood what was happening and laws that would protect me and the kids. When I got back, Fiona was making lunch and she asked how it went. I told her Miranda was great and that I was meeting with her again next week to discuss next steps. Fiona hugged me and said she was proud of me for taking action. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that until she said it. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Blake. He asked when we were coming home and said Jenna was very hurt by my accusations. I stared at that text for a long time. Even now, even after everything, he was worried about Jenna's feelings. Not mine, not the kids, Jenna's. I texted back that I would come get more clothes for me and the kids, but we weren't moving back in until he agreed to marriage counseling and set serious boundaries with Jenna. Real boundaries, not the fake ones where she still texted him constantly and came over whenever she wanted. Blake's response came back fast. "You're being ridiculous." That was it. Nothing else. No agreement to counseling, no acknowledgement that maybe he needed to change something. Just me being ridiculous for having basic expectations in my own marriage. I put my phone down and didn't pick it up again for the rest of the night. I waited until Blake's car pulled out of the driveway before I grabbed my keys. The house looked different when I walked in, like something had shifted even though everything was in the same place. Dishes covered the kitchen counter and filled the sink, crusted with food from at least 3 days. The smell hit me when I got closer. Something sour and rotten from the garbage that hadn't been taken out. Blake's work shirts were piled on the couch where he'd thrown them, and I could see into our bedroom where the sheets were tangled and half off the bed. He couldn't even manage basic cleaning without me there to do it for him. I walked through each room taking inventory of what I needed. Birth certificates and social security cards went into my bag first, then the kids' medical records from the filing cabinet. I pulled photo albums off the shelf in the living room, the ones with pictures of the kids as babies and my grandmother's old photos that I'd never want Blake to have. My hands moved on autopilot, grabbing things methodically while my brain stayed numb. I was folding clothes in the bedroom when I heard the front door open. My whole body went cold because Blake wasn't supposed to be home for hours. But it wasn't Blake's footsteps I heard coming down the hall. Jenna walked into the bedroom holding a bag of groceries like she lived here. Her face went through about 5 different expressions when she saw me standing there with my suitcase open on the bed. She recovered fast, though, putting on this concerned look that made my skin crawl. She opened her mouth to say something about Blake needing help or support or whatever excuse she'd come up with. I held up my hand and cut her off before she could get the words out. I told her to give me the key to my house right now. My voice came out flat and hard, nothing like the polite tone I'd used with her for years. Jenna's hand went to her pocket and she clutched something there, her eyes going wide like I'd asked her to cut off her own arm. She said Blake gave her the key so she could check on him, that I was abandoning him when he needed support the most. The words came out fast and defensive, like she'd practiced this speech. I held out my hand and didn't move. I told her she had 10 seconds to put that key in my palm, or I was calling the police and reporting her for trespassing in my house. I started counting out loud. 1, 2, 3. Jenna's face went red and she fumbled with her keychain, her fingers shaking as she worked the house key off the ring. She practically threw it on the dresser instead of handing it to me, then turned and walked out without another word. I heard the front door slam hard enough to rattle the windows. I picked up the key and put it in my pocket, then went back to packing like nothing had happened. My phone started ringing 20 minutes later while I was loading boxes into my car. Blake's name flashed on the screen and I knew Jenna had called him the second she got to her car. I answered and pulled the phone away from my ear because he was already screaming before I could say hello. He yelled about how I threatened his best friend and made her cry, how I had no right to take her key when she was just trying to help him through this difficult time. I waited for him to take a breath, and then I told him very clearly that I would not tolerate another woman having a key to my house and coming and going whenever she wanted. He called me controlling and jealous, said Jenna was just trying to be supportive and I was punishing her for being a good friend. I hung up while he was still talking and blocked his number for the rest of the day. Back at Fiona's house that night, I sat at her kitchen table while the kids watched a movie in the other room. Fiona made us both tea and sat across from me, her hands wrapped around her mug. She asked me what I really wanted, not what Blake wanted or what would make everyone else happy, but what I actually wanted for my life. I opened my mouth to answer and realized I didn't know. She leaned forward and asked if I thought Blake would actually change, if marriage counseling could fix what was broken between us. I thought about the bikini photo in his wallet and the $800 purse he bought Jenna and the 2 a.m. drives to her apartment. I thought about how he'd never once chosen me over her, not in any moment that mattered. I told Fiona I didn't believe he would change because he didn't think anything was wrong. He saw Jenna as his best friend, and me as the jealous wife trying to ruin it. That wasn't something a counselor could fix because Blake didn't want it fixed. Fiona nodded like she'd been waiting for me to figure that out. She asked what I was going to do, and I told her I didn't know yet, but I knew I couldn't go back to living like that. The next morning, I woke up with this clarity I hadn't felt in months. I waited until 9 o'clock when I knew Miranda would be in her office. Then I called her number with my hands shaking so bad I almost dropped the phone. When she answered, I told her I wanted to move forward with the divorce. My voice cracked on the word divorce, but I got it out. Miranda's tone shifted into business mode immediately. She said she'd start drafting the paperwork and we'd file within the week, that I was making the right choice for myself and my kids. After I hung up, I sat there staring at my phone for a long time. It felt real now in a way it hadn't before. 2 days later, I met with a real estate appraiser at the house. His name was Warren Howell, and he showed up exactly on time with a clipboard and a camera. He walked through every room taking measurements and photos, making notes about the updated kitchen and the new roof I'd paid for last year with my inheritance money. He asked questions about when things were renovated and what improvements had been made. When he finished, he sat down at the kitchen table to go over his findings. The number he gave me for the house value made me blink twice. The neighborhood had gone up in value way more than I realized, and with all the improvements, the house was worth almost double what I thought. Warren printed out his preliminary report and handed it to me, saying the full appraisal would be ready in a few days. Blake found out about the appraiser somehow, probably from a neighbor who saw Warren's car in the driveway. 3 hours after Warren left, Blake showed up at Fiona's house again. I heard his car pull up and looked out the window to see Jenna sitting in the passenger seat. My stomach dropped. Blake got out and marched up to the front door, pounding on it hard enough that Fiona's dog started barking. I went to the door but didn't open it, just talked through it and asked what he wanted. He demanded to know what I was planning and why I had someone appraising our house. I told him he'd find out soon enough when he got served with papers. His face went purple through the window in the door. He started yelling about how I couldn't just take his house, that he had rights too. I reminded him the house was never his. It was mine from my grandmother, and he knew that when we got married. Then Jenna got out of the car. She actually walked up to Fiona's front door and started yelling that I was a horrible wife who didn't appreciate Blake, that he'd given me everything and I was throwing it away over nothing. Her voice got louder and more shrill with every word. Fiona came up behind me and opened the door just wide enough to stick her head out. She told Jenna that if she didn't get off her property immediately, she was calling the police for harassment. Blake grabbed Jenna's arm and pulled her back toward the car. She was still yelling as he shoved her into the passenger seat. They drove off with Jenna's face pressed against the window, her mouth still moving. The divorce papers were ready 3 days later. Miranda called me to come to her office and walked me through every page. She pointed out the sections requesting primary custody, with Blake getting standard visitation every other weekend and 1 evening per week. The papers stated I was keeping the house as my separate property since it came from my inheritance before the marriage. We'd split the small amount of savings in our joint account and each keep our own cars. Miranda explained that a process server would deliver the papers to Blake at his workplace the next day, that serving him at work was standard procedure, and would create a legal record of when he received them. I signed everywhere she pointed and my hand cramped up by the last page. Miranda put all the documents in a folder and told me to expect Blake to react badly, that I should stay at Fiona's and not answer his calls for at least a few days. She said his lawyer would contact her and they'd handle everything from there. I drove back to Fiona's house feeling like I was watching myself from outside my body. Everything felt surreal and too fast and exactly right all at the same time. That night I couldn't sleep. Just kept checking my phone even though Miranda said the server wouldn't go until the next afternoon. I made breakfast for the kids the next morning and got them off to the school like it was a normal day. Then I sat on Fiona's couch and waited. Miranda texted me at 2 in the afternoon with just 3 words confirming Blake had been served. I stared at that text for a full minute before my hands started shaking. 20 minutes later, my phone started ringing with Blake's number over and over. I didn't answer. He left 7 voicemails in the first hour, his voice getting more angry and desperate with each one. The first one was him yelling about how I couldn't do this to him. The 4th one was him crying and begging me to call him back. The 7th one was him saying his lawyer was going to destroy me in court. I deleted all of them without listening to the whole messages. Blake's mom called that evening and I made the mistake of answering. She tore into me immediately, saying I was destroying her son's life and breaking up the family. She said Blake deserved half the house because he'd lived there and been a good husband. I told her very calmly that the house was legally mine from my grandmother's estate, and Blake had no claim to it. She called me selfish and said I was using money to punish Blake for having a close friend. I explained that Blake's close friend sat on his lap at parties and had a key to my house and planned his birthday without me. His mom said I was exaggerating everything and that I needed to be more secure. I hung up on her and blocked her number too. The next few days were a nightmare of Blake's family members calling to yell at me or beg me to reconsider. I blocked them one by one until my phone finally went quiet. Blake only sent text messages for the next 2 days. I kept my phone on silent, but I could see the notifications stacking up on my screen. He sent long paragraphs about how I was overreacting, and shorter ones begging me to answer him. Some messages blamed me for being jealous. Others said he missed the kids. None of them mentioned changing anything about Jenna. I forwarded a few to Miranda when she asked for documentation of his communication patterns. She said his messages showed he still didn't understand the problem, which would help our case if we needed it. Blake's family started calling on day 3. His brother left a voicemail saying I was tearing the family apart over nothing. His sister sent a text with crying emojis asking me to think about the kids. I deleted most of the messages without reading them fully because I knew what they'd say. Blake's mom called while I was making dinner for the kids, and I answered without thinking. She started yelling immediately about how I was destroying her son and breaking up the family over my insecurity. She said Blake deserved half the house because he'd lived there and been a good provider. I stirred the pasta with one hand and held the phone away from my ear with the other. She kept going about how selfish I was being and how Blake just had a close friendship that I couldn't handle. I waited for her to take a breath, and then I explained very slowly that the house came from my grandmother's estate before Blake and I got married. It was legally mine alone, and Blake had no claim to it regardless of how long he'd lived there. She called me a greedy witch and said I was using money to punish Blake for having friends. I told her that Blake's friend sat on his lap at parties and had a key to my house and planned his birthday without consulting his wife. His mom said I was exaggerating everything to play the victim, while she was mid-sentence and blocked her number. My hands shook while I drained the pasta, and I had to sit down for a minute before I could plate the food for the kids. Blake's aunt called the next morning. His uncle called that afternoon. His cousin sent a long email about family loyalty and forgiveness. Each one had a slightly different approach, but the message was the same. I was being unreasonable and I needed to come home and work things out. I blocked the aunt and uncle immediately. I read the cousin's email once and then deleted it. Miranda told me to keep a log of everyone who contacted me and what they said, so I started a document on my laptop with dates and times and brief summaries. By the end of the week, I had 17 entries. Blake sent an email to my work address since I wasn't responding to his texts anymore. He said I was ruining his life and making everything harder than it needed to be. He said Jenna was helping him find a good attorney because she actually cared about him getting through this. I forwarded that email to Miranda with the subject line, Exhibit A. She replied with a thumbs up emoji and said Blake was building our case for us. The kids asked about going home every single day. My son wanted his toys from his room. My daughter missed her bed. They didn't understand why we were still at Aunt Fiona's house when we were only supposed to stay a few days. I sat them down on Fiona's couch on Saturday morning and tried to explain in words they could understand. I said Mommy and Daddy were having grown-up problems, and we needed to live separately for a while. My son asked if we were getting divorced like his friend's parents. I said maybe, that we were figuring things out. My daughter looked at me with her big eyes and asked if it was because of Jenna. I froze because I didn't know how to answer that honestly without making Blake look bad to his own kids. I told her it was complicated, and that Daddy and I had different ideas about what a marriage should look like. She nodded like she understood, but I could tell she didn't really. My son asked if we'd ever go home, and I promised him we would, that our house was still ours and we'd be back there soon. I didn't tell them that when we went back, their dad wouldn't be living there anymore. Miranda called me the following Tuesday with news. Blake's attorney had sent a response to our divorce filing. She read parts of it to me over the phone, and I could hear the amusement in her voice. Blake's lawyer was demanding he get half the value of the house and claiming he'd contributed to mortgage payments during the marriage. Miranda actually laughed and said she'd been hoping they'd try this angle. She explained that she had all the documentation showing the house was paid off completely with my inheritance money before Blake and I even got engaged. There had never been a mortgage for him to contribute to. The house was my separate property under state law, and his attorney had no legal ground to stand on. She said Blake's lawyer was either incompetent or desperate or both. I felt relief wash over me. So strongly I had to sit down. Miranda said she'd send a response with all the proof and shut down that argument immediately. She told me not to worry because Blake's case was falling apart before it even really started. 2 weeks crawled by with me staying at Fiona's and managing the kids' schedules and trying to keep everything normal for them. Blake texted on a Thursday afternoon asking if we could meet in person without lawyers. He said he just wanted to talk and see if we could work things out before this got even messier. I called Miranda to ask what I should do. She advised me to only communicate through attorneys from now on, and not to meet with Blake alone. I sat with her advice for a few hours, but something in me needed to see him face to face one more time. I needed to look him in the eye and see if there was any part of the man I married who understood what he'd done to our family. I texted Blake back and agreed to meet him at a coffee shop downtown the next day at noon. I picked a busy place with lots of windows and people around. Miranda wasn't happy when I told her, but she said to keep my phone recording in my pocket just in case. I got to the coffee shop 15 minutes early and sat at a table near the window where I could see the door. Blake walked in right at noon looking worse than I'd ever seen him. He hadn't shaved in days and his clothes were wrinkled like he'd slept in them. He had dark circles under his eyes and his hair stuck up in the back. He saw me and walked over slowly like he wasn't sure I'd really be there. He sat down across from me and immediately started talking about how much he missed me and the kids. He said the house felt empty without us, and he couldn't sleep in our bed because it reminded him of me. He begged me to drop the divorce and come home. He said he'd do anything to fix this and make our family whole again. I watched him talk and felt nothing, but sadness for how pathetic he looked. I asked him one question. Would he cut off all contact with Jenna completely and go to real marriage counseling with me? He opened his mouth to answer and then closed it again. He looked down at his coffee cup and I watched him struggle with the answer for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 seconds. That hesitation told me everything I needed to know. Blake finally said he could set better boundaries with Jenna, but she was his best friend, and he couldn't just abandon her when she needed him. He said it wouldn't be fair to end a friendship that had lasted since college just because I felt threatened by it. I told him very clearly that he'd already abandoned his wife and children for her. He'd left our daughter sick with a fever to comfort Jenna at 2 in the morning. He'd forgotten our anniversary but spent $800 on Jenna's birthday present. He'd let her plan his birthday party and give a speech about being his soulmate while I sat there humiliated. I said I was done competing for last place in my own marriage, and I was done pretending his relationship with Jenna was normal friendship. Blake's eyes filled with tears, and he reached across the table to grab my hand. He said I was being cruel and unfair, that I was making him choose between 2 people he cared about. I pulled my hand away and stood up. I told him he'd already made his choice every single day for months, and I was just finally accepting it. I walked out of the coffee shop and didn't look back. Blake texted me 3 hours later. The message said Jenna was helping him get through this hard time, and she'd been more supportive than I ever was. She understood him in ways I never could, and she was proving to be a real friend when he needed one most. I read the text twice and then took a screenshot of it. I opened my email and sent the screenshot to Miranda with a short message saying this showed exactly where Blake's priorities were. Miranda replied within minutes saying this was perfect evidence and to save any other messages like this. I felt sad but also certain I'd made the right choice. Blake was never going to change and I was never going to be enough for him as long as Jenna was in the picture. The kids had a terrible week after that. My daughter got in trouble at the school for pushing another kid on the playground. The teacher called me in for a meeting and I had to explain that we were going through a family separation, and my daughter was struggling with the changes. The teacher was understanding, but said my daughter had been acting out in class too, not following directions and talking back to adults. I apologized and promised to work with her at home. The school counselor came into the meeting and offered to see my daughter once a week to help her process everything that was happening. I agreed immediately because I knew I couldn't help her work through this on my own. My daughter cried when I picked her up from the school that day. She said she was sorry for being bad and she just wanted everything to go back to normal. I held her in the car for 20 minutes while she sobbed into my shoulder. I promised her that things would get better, even though I wasn't totally sure that was true. I just knew I had to believe it for her sake. My daughter cried herself to sleep that night and I sat on the edge of her bed watching her chest rise and fall. The school counselor's card sat on my nightstand, and I knew I'd be calling first thing in the morning. Fiona knocked softly on the door and gestured for me to come out to the living room where she had 2 mugs of tea waiting. She didn't say anything, just handed me one and sat down next to me on the couch. I took a sip and felt the warmth spread through my chest, but it didn't touch the cold knot in my stomach. My phone buzzed with another text from Blake asking when we were coming home, and I turned it face down on the coffee table. Fiona reached over and squeezed my hand and told me I was doing the right thing, that my daughter would be okay, that kids were tough. I wanted to believe her, but all I could see was my little girl's face asking if Daddy loved someone else more than us. Miranda called me 2 days later with news that made my stomach drop. Blake's lawyer had filed a response to our divorce papers claiming Blake deserved spousal support because I was keeping the house. I sat down hard on Fiona's kitchen chair and asked how that was even possible when the house was mine from my grandmother. Miranda's voice was calm and steady as she explained that Blake's lawyer was grasping at straws, trying to find any angle that might work. She said she'd already started putting together documentation of Blake's income, his spending patterns, and the $800 purse he bought for another woman while giving me a Target gift card. She told me about the evidence we had of his emotional abandonment, the 2 a.m. trips to comfort his best friend while our daughter had a fever, the constant prioritizing of someone else over his family. Miranda said Blake's lawyer would see all of this, and the spousal support request would disappear fast. I thanked her and hung up feeling shaky, but also grateful that someone was fighting for me with actual legal knowledge and strategy. The documentation Miranda sent over was brutal to read. She'd compiled bank statements showing every lunch Blake bought for another woman, every gift, every dinner. The pattern was so clear when you saw it all laid out like that. He'd spent thousands on someone who wasn't his wife while our kids needed new shoes, and I was clipping coupons for groceries. Miranda had also included text message records showing the constant communication, the heart emojis, the selfies asking if she looked cute. She'd highlighted the 2 a.m. timestamp on the night he left our sick daughter to comfort his best friend. The packet was 50 pages long, and it told the story of a man who'd checked out of his marriage completely. 3 days later, Miranda called to say Blake's lawyer had withdrawn the spousal support request without explanation. I felt a surge of satisfaction knowing they'd seen the evidence and realized they had no case. I started looking for a new job the next week because my current hours wouldn't work for single parenting. I needed something with flexibility for school pickups and sick days, and all the things Blake used to theoretically help with, even though he was usually too busy with his best friend. Fiona helped me update my resume at her kitchen table, asking questions about my work history and skills that I'd forgotten I even had. She made me practice answering interview questions until I stopped sounding apologetic for needing reasonable hours. It felt good to focus on something forward-looking instead of just surviving each day. I applied to 6 different positions over 2 weeks and got 3 callbacks. The third interview was with a company that specifically advertised flexible scheduling for working parents, and the manager interviewing me was a single mom herself. She understood immediately when I explained my situation and said they valued employees who were honest about their needs. I left that interview feeling hopeful for the first time in months. Blake's lawyer sent over a proposed custody schedule a week later, and I stared at it in disbelief. He wanted the kids every single weekend, Friday after school through Sunday night. Miranda called me after I'd emailed her the proposal, and I could hear the annoyance in her voice even though she stayed professional. She said that was not standard and we'd be countering with every other weekend plus 1 evening per week for dinner. I asked if Blake could actually get more time than that given everything that had happened, and Miranda said his lawyer could try to argue for it. But we had strong grounds to limit his time. She reminded me about the pattern of him leaving the kids to attend to his best friend, the forgotten appointments, the times he'd been physically present but emotionally checked out. She said judges looked at what was actually best for the children, not what the parent wanted, and a parent who'd consistently put someone else first wasn't going to get maximum custody time. The kids came back from their first overnight visit with Blake, and my daughter seemed quiet and withdrawn. I made her favorite dinner and tried to get her to talk about the weekend, but she just pushed her food around her plate. Finally, after her brother went to play, she looked up at me with big worried eyes and said Daddy let his friend come over to his new apartment. My heart started pounding and I asked which friend, even though I already knew. She said the lady who wanted to live in her room, the one who was always at our old house. I kept my voice calm and asked what happened when the lady was there. My daughter said she made them lunch and told them she was going to be like a bonus mom and that they'd do lots of fun things together. I felt sick to my stomach, but I smiled at my daughter and told her she did nothing wrong by telling me. As soon as she went to bed, I called Miranda and left a message saying we had a problem. Miranda called back within an hour, even though it was late. I explained what my daughter had told me, and Miranda was quiet for a moment before saying we needed to file a motion immediately to restrict Blake from having his best friend around during parenting time. She said judges took these situations seriously, especially when a third party had been the source of marital problems and was now trying to insert herself into the children's lives without any legal relationship to them. We spent 30 minutes on the phone while Miranda took detailed notes about exactly what my daughter had said. She told me to write down everything I remembered while it was fresh and send it to her first thing in the morning. I sat at Fiona's kitchen table after we hung up and wrote 3 pages of notes, my hands shaking as I tried to capture every word my daughter had used. The court hearing happened faster than I expected. Miranda filed our emergency motion and we got a date within 2 weeks. I sat in the courtroom next to Miranda while Blake and his lawyer sat across the aisle. Blake looked angry and kept whispering to his lawyer who nodded and took notes. The judge was a woman in her 50s who looked tired but alert as she read through our motion. Miranda stood up and explained the situation clearly and calmly, talking about how the third party had been the source of conflict in the marriage and was now trying to position herself as a parental figure to children she had no legal relationship with. Blake's lawyer argued that his client had a right to have friends in his life and that we were trying to isolate him. The judge looked at Blake and asked directly if the woman in question had been present during his parenting time. Blake hesitated and then admitted she had stopped by briefly. The judge's expression didn't change, but she made a note on her papers. She said she was granting a temporary order that Blake could not have this specific person present during his custody time until a full hearing could be scheduled. Blake's face went red and his lawyer started to object, but the judge cut him off and said, introducing a third party who'd been the source of marital conflict was not in the children's best interest at this time. I felt Miranda's hand squeeze my arm under the table. Blake sent me an email that night and I knew before opening it that it would be bad. He wrote that I was poisoning the kids against his best friend, and that they needed to get used to her being in his life because she wasn't going anywhere. He said I was being cruel and manipulative and using the children as weapons. He said his best friend had been nothing but kind to the kids and wanted to build a relationship with them. He wrote 3 full paragraphs about how she understood him better than I ever had, and how she was helping him through the hardest time of his life. I read it twice and then forwarded it to Miranda without typing a single word in response. Every message he sent just proved that she remained his priority over his own children, over being a good father, over everything else in his life. 3 months crawled by with court dates and lawyer calls and custody exchanges. Blake showed up late twice to pick up the kids. and I documented it with timestamps and texts. The kids came back saying Daddy seemed sad all the time, but at least the lady wasn't there anymore. Miranda kept me updated on negotiations, and slowly we got closer to final terms. Blake's lawyer finally told him he had no legal standing to fight for the house because it was my separate property from before the marriage. Miranda called me with the news that we were close to finalizing everything. I'd keep the house in primary custody. Blake would get every other weekend and Wednesday dinners, and we'd split the small savings account we'd had. It wasn't much money, but I didn't care. I just wanted it to be over. I took the kids back to our house on a Saturday morning when I knew Blake was at work. They burst out of the car and ran up the front steps like they'd been holding their breath for months. My daughter ran straight to her room, and I heard her squeal with happiness that her stuff was still there. My son ran through every room touching things like he needed to make sure they were real. I walked through, slowly taking in the space that was mine now. Really mine. Not shared with someone who didn't want to be there. The first thing I did was call a locksmith, and he came out that same afternoon. I watched him change every lock on every door, and when he handed me the new keys, it felt like more than just metal. It felt like safety. It felt like this was our home now. Protected and secure, and nobody could walk in uninvited ever again. Blake had to come get his stuff the following week, and I made sure I wasn't there for it. Fiona agreed to supervise and make sure he only took his personal belongings, and nothing that belonged to me or the kids. I took the kids to a movie and kept my phone in my purse even though I wanted to check it every 5 minutes. When we got back to Fiona's house, she was already there with a small smile on her face. She said it went fine. Blake took his clothes and some furniture we'd agreed on, and he'd been professional about the whole thing. Then she paused and added that his best friend had been with him helping him pack. I wasn't surprised at all. Of course she was there. She'd probably helped him decide what to take. She'd probably walked through my house like she'd always wanted to, finally getting to be there without me in the way. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday morning in a courtroom with just our lawyers present. I didn't have to see Blake or sit near him or hear his voice. Miranda and his lawyer worked out the last details with the judge, and then it was done. Miranda found me in the hallway after and shook my hand firmly and told me I did great, that I'd handled everything with strength and dignity. I thanked her and paid her final bill and walked out of the courthouse into bright morning sunshine. I got to my car and sat in the driver's seat with my hands on the steering wheel. The divorce decree was in my bag. The house keys were in my pocket. My kids were at the school having a normal day. I was officially single and officially a homeowner, and officially done with a marriage that had been over long before I'd found that bikini photo in a wallet. I put my head down on the steering wheel and cried for 20 minutes straight, big, ugly sobs that shook my whole body. I cried for the marriage I'd thought I had. I cried for my kids who deserved better. I cried because I was relieved and sad and scared and free all at the same time. I picked up paint samples at the hardware store the next weekend. The kids came with me and my daughter grabbed every purple swatch she could find while my son debated between blue and green for his room. We spent an hour holding different colors up to the walls in each room, making a game of it. My daughter insisted on the brightest purple they had, and I didn't argue because seeing her excited about her space felt more important than my taste. We painted her room first on a Saturday morning with the windows open and music playing. She helped roll paint on the lower half of the walls while I did the higher parts. When we finished, she stood in the doorway staring at her bright purple walls with the biggest smile. Then she ran to the linen closet and pulled out sheets I'd bought her the day before, also purple with little stars on them. While I made up her bed with the new bedding, she said she was glad Jenna wasn't going to live in her room after all. I hugged her tight and told her this room was all hers and nobody else's. Blake picked up the kids for his first official weekend 2 weeks later. He showed up 20 minutes late without calling and barely apologized when I opened the door. The kids grabbed their overnight bags and climbed into his car while I stood on the porch documenting the pickup time in my phone. The next weekend he was late again, this time by almost an hour. I called his cell 3 times before he answered saying he'd lost track of time. When the kids came home Sunday night, my daughter was quiet and my son seemed distracted. I asked how their weekend was and my daughter shrugged and said, "Daddy seemed sad the whole time." My son added that Jenna was there a lot even though she wasn't supposed to be. I kept my face calm and asked what they meant by a lot. My daughter said Jenna made them breakfast both mornings and watched movies with them on the couch. My son said Jenna helped Daddy make dinner and stayed until bedtime. I wrote down everything they said word for word in a notebook I kept specifically for custody documentation. I called Miranda the next morning and told her what the kids had reported. She asked me to have them write down or draw pictures of what happened during their visits if they were comfortable doing that. My daughter drew a picture of the 3 of them at Daddy's apartment with Jenna standing between Blake and the kids. My son wrote a simple list of activities that included Jenna's name in almost every item. Miranda said this was enough to file another motion, and she'd get the paperwork started immediately. Blake's lawyer responded claiming Jenna only stopped by briefly to drop off groceries and that the kids were exaggerating. But when the court-appointed child advocate interviewed my daughter separately, she told him that Jenna was there for entire visits, making them meals and watching movies with them. She said Jenna tried to act like their mom and it made her uncomfortable. The advocate included this information in his report to the judge. The hearing happened on a Thursday morning in the same courtroom where our divorce was finalized. Blake sat at his table looking annoyed while his lawyer shuffled papers. The judge read through the child advocate's report and then asked Blake directly if Jenna had been present during his parenting time. Blake started to answer, but his lawyer put a hand on his arm and spoke for him, saying there may have been some brief visits. The judge looked up from the papers with a stern expression, and said the previous order was clear that introducing the third party who caused marital conflict was not appropriate during this transition period. Then he modified the order to be even more specific, stating that Jenna could not be at Blake's residence at all during his parenting time, and that violations would result in supervised visitation only. Blake's face went red and he started to stand up, but his lawyer grabbed his arm and whispered something that made him sit back down. The judge asked if Blake understood the order, and Blake nodded without saying anything. I started my new job the following Monday at a marketing firm downtown. The pay was better than my previous position, and my boss made it clear during the interview that she understood single-parent scheduling needs. My first week was busy learning new systems and meeting coworkers, but I felt energized instead of drained when I came home. The flexible hours meant I could do school pickup most days and work from home when the kids were sick. On my third day, my boss stopped by my desk and asked how I was settling in. I told her great and thanked her for the opportunity. She smiled and said she could tell I was going to be an asset to the team. Driving home that evening, I realized this job felt like more than just a paycheck. It felt like I was building a life that belonged to me now, not a life where I managed everyone else's needs while mine got ignored. The kids settled into their routine over the next few months. Every other weekend they went to Blake's apartment, and every Wednesday he picked them up for dinner. My daughter still had rough days where she asked why Daddy didn't live with us anymore, but the school counselor said she was adjusting well considering everything. My son threw fewer tantrums and started sleeping through the night again. The counselor met with them weekly and reported that they understood their parents weren't getting back together and were learning to accept their new normal. My daughter stopped asking about Jenna as much, and when she did mention her, it was usually to say something Jenna did that annoyed her. I never asked follow-up questions or encouraged negativity, but I noticed my daughter seemed relieved that Jenna wasn't around our house anymore. Blake's mother showed up at my door on a Saturday afternoon without calling first. I was in the middle of making lunch when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find her standing on my porch with a tight smile, asking if she could see her grandchildren. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me so the kids wouldn't hear. I told her calmly that she was welcome to see the kids, but she needed to schedule visits in advance, and that I wouldn't tolerate any criticism of me in front of them. She huffed and said I was being controlling and that she had a right to see her grandchildren whenever she wanted. I repeated that she could see them, but only during scheduled visits, and only if she agreed to be respectful. She stared at me for a long moment, then said fine and asked when would be convenient. We agreed on the following Sunday afternoon, and she left looking unhappy, but she called first the next week like I'd asked. 6 months after filing for divorce, I sat in my living room on a Tuesday evening watching the kids play a board game on the floor. The house was quiet except for their laughter, and the occasional argument over game rules. Blake's phone wasn't buzzing constantly on the coffee table because Blake wasn't there. Jenna wasn't texting pictures asking if she looked cute. Nobody was interrupting our family time to comfort someone else. We'd eaten dinner together at the kitchen table without anyone walking away mid-meal to take a call. My daughter had told me about her day at the school, and my son had shown me a drawing he made without competing for attention. I looked around at our home with its freshly painted walls and rearranged furniture and realized I felt peaceful for the first time in years. Not happy exactly because divorce and single parenting were hard, but peaceful in a way I'd forgotten was possible. I heard through a mutual friend the following week that Blake and Jenna were officially dating now. The friend seemed hesitant to tell me like she thought I'd be upset, but I just nodded and said I wasn't surprised. She asked if I was okay, and I told her honestly that I felt relieved more than anything. Part of me wanted to feel angry that everything I'd suspected was true, and that Blake had probably been emotionally involved with Jenna the whole time. But mostly I just felt glad I wasn't in that situation anymore. Glad I wasn't the wife being pushed aside while her husband prioritized his best friend. They could have each other and whatever messy relationship they'd built while destroying my marriage. I had my house and my kids and my peace. My daughter brought home a drawing from the school the next week that the teacher had assigned about family. She'd drawn 3 figures in front of a house with a purple roof. It was her brother, and me. The house had flowers in front and a sun in the corner. I looked at the drawing for a long time before asking where Daddy was. She shrugged and said she drew our real family, the people who live together. My heart broke a little because no kid should have to think about their family being split up, but it also showed me that she understood our new reality and had accepted it in her own way. I hung the drawing on the refrigerator next to her purple bedroom photo and a picture of the 3 of us at the park from last weekend. A few weeks later, Blake's lawyer sent an email asking if he could have the kids for an extra week during summer vacation. I read it twice, considering my options. The kids needed time with their dad, and refusing would only hurt them. I typed out my response carefully, saying yes, but adding that Jenna could not be present at any point during that week per the court order. His lawyer replied within an hour, confirming Blake understood and would comply. I printed the email exchange and added it to my growing file of documentation, just in case. Fiona mentioned a support group for divorced parents that met Thursday evenings at a community center downtown. I almost didn't go because the idea of sitting in a circle talking about my failed marriage sounded terrible. But I showed up anyway and found 12 other people in folding chairs drinking bad coffee. A woman named Sarah shared about her ex getting half their house even though he cheated with their neighbor. She looked directly at me when she said I was lucky to have the house in my name already. Another dad talked about his kids refusing to see him because his girlfriend moved in too fast. I didn't share much that first night, just listened. But driving home, I felt less alone than I had in months. On Saturday morning, I took the kids to the garden center and let them pick out vegetable seeds and flower bulbs. My daughter chose tomatoes and sunflowers while my son wanted carrots because he liked the color orange. Blake always said gardening was too much work and that we should just buy produce at the store. We spent the afternoon in the backyard digging holes and planting everything in neat rows. My daughter insisted on naming each plant as we put it in the ground. She called the biggest tomato plant Gerald and a sunflower Susan. When we finished and stood looking at our work, she grabbed my hand and said this was her favorite house now because it was just ours. A year had passed since that bikini photo fell out of Blake's wallet and turned my whole life sideways. I tucked the kids into bed in our house, my house, reading them one more chapter before turning out the light. Single parenting exhausted me most days, and money stayed tight no matter how carefully I budgeted. But I wasn't competing for my own husband's attention anymore. The kids were doing better in the school, making new friends, laughing more at dinner. I had a job I actually liked, and we were building traditions that belonged only to us. Blake still took the kids every other weekend, and Jenna apparently lived with him now, which just proved I made the right choice. I kept the house and got my self-respect back, and that was worth more than any marriage that required me to accept second place.
Francesca had lived in the apartment across from mine for 2 years, and I could count on one hand how many times she'd actually spoken to me, mostly just tight nods in the hallway, the kind that said, "I see you exist, but let's not make this a thing." So when she stopped me on Saturday morning outside my door and asked if that guy in the black jacket had found me yet, I just stood there with my grocery bags trying to process what she was even talking about. What guy? She shifted her weight and explained that someone had been hanging around the building yesterday afternoon, knocking on doors and asking which apartment was mine. He'd described me specifically. Brown hair, early 20s, drives the silver Lexus in spot 47. When he got to her door, she'd told him she didn't know anything because that's what you tell random strangers asking about your neighbors. But she thought I should probably know someone was looking for me that specifically. I thanked her and she disappeared back into her apartment before I could ask anything else. I stood there in the hallway trying to figure out who would send someone to find me, instead of just texting or calling like a normal person. My mom hadn't mentioned sending anyone. My dad lived 3 states away in Ohio, and definitely would have told me if he'd hired some kind of courier service or whatever. I called my brother Reggie on my way inside and he laughed, told me I was being paranoid, that it was probably just a delivery guy who couldn't find the right apartment and gave up. But delivery guys don't describe you physically. They have a tracking number and an address. They leave the package at the office or by your door and they move on to the next stop. I texted Cassandra because we'd been planning to meet up that afternoon anyway. She responded almost immediately saying it was actually weird I'd brought that up. She'd seen someone matching that exact description outside the CVS near campus on Thursday. A guy in a black jacket just standing by the entrance like he was waiting for someone, but not really looking at his phone or doing anything, just watching people come and go. She'd noticed him because he'd been there for at least 20 minutes while she was shopping and was still there when she left. She hadn't thought much about it until right now. The CVS was 6 blocks from my apartment. It wasn't on the way to anywhere I regularly went. You don't just end up standing outside a random CVS for 20 minutes unless you're waiting for something specific. I asked what else she remembered about him. She said average height, maybe early 30s, dark hair, nothing that stood out about his face, but he had this way of standing. Really still, really focused, that made her think he was looking for someone in particular. She'd figured it was some weird dating app meetup situation and forgotten about it. 2 sightings in 2 days. Both in places I actually went to regularly. Both matching the same description. I called Reggie back and told him this wasn't me being paranoid anymore. He got serious fast and mentioned that he'd actually noticed a car he didn't recognize parked across from his house yesterday. Dark blue or black sedan with tinted windows. But he'd assumed it was someone visiting the neighbors. Now he wasn't so sure. He told me to stay inside, keep my doors locked, and he'd drive up from Frederick tomorrow morning to figure this out with me. I couldn't just sit there doing nothing. I pulled up my blinds just enough to angle myself so I could see the parking lot without being obvious about it. And I waited. For about 40 minutes, I saw nothing except normal Saturday afternoon activity. Mrs. Flores from Building C walking her ancient beagle, 2 teenagers doing tricks on skateboards by the mailboxes, someone loading furniture into a U-Haul. Then I saw him. Black jacket, dark jeans, hands shoved in his pockets, standing near the dumpster enclosure like he had every right to be there. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't smoking. He wasn't doing anything except watching my building with this patient, measured focus that made my skin crawl. I grabbed my keys and my phone and went downstairs before I could talk myself out of it. The smart thing would have been to call the police, but what would I even say? There's a man standing near the dumpsters? He hasn't done anything illegal. He's just there. When I came through the side entrance, he turned toward me like he'd been expecting exactly this. Like he'd been waiting for me to come to him. I kept about 20 feet of distance between us. "You've been asking about me," I said. "So here I am. What do you want?" He didn't move closer. Just tilted his head slightly and told me he was looking for someone and he thought I might be able to help him find her. He had this calm, reasonable way of talking that somehow made the whole situation feel even more wrong. "I don't know what you're talking about," I said. He explained that the woman he was looking for had gone off the grid about 7 months ago, that her ex-boyfriend was getting increasingly concerned about her well-being and had hired him to locate her. He described her in detail: short dark hair, mid-20s, petite build, small tattoo of a hummingbird on her left wrist. He said he'd tracked her digital footprint as far as Baltimore and that my name had come up more than once in his research. He seemed to think I might know where she was staying. "I've never seen anyone like that," I said, even though my hands were shaking. He smiled, not friendly, just acknowledging that I was lying, and pulled a business card from his jacket pocket. He told me the ex-boyfriend was offering a substantial finder's fee for information leading to her current address. Enough money to make it very much worth my while. All I had to do was call the number on the card when I changed my mind about cooperating. I didn't take the card. He placed it carefully on the ground between us, stepped back, and walked toward the dark sedan parked on the street. He drove away without looking back. I waited until his car disappeared around the corner. Then I went back inside, locked every lock on my door, and grabbed the burner phone from my desk drawer, the one I'd bought 7 months ago for emergencies I desperately hoped would never actually happen, and dialed the only number saved in it. She picked up on the second ring. "Annette, listen to me. He's coming. Grab what you can and disappear, tonight." "What happened?" Annette's voice came out barely above a whisper. 7 months ago, she'd shown up at my door at 2 in the morning with a split lip, a black eye that was already swelling shut, and a backpack containing everything she owned that mattered. Her boyfriend Kyle had put her in the hospital twice in the past year. Once for a broken wrist he'd claimed was from her tripping on the stairs. Once for cracked ribs he'd said happened when she fell during an argument. She'd finally decided she was done waiting around for him to actually kill her. I'd driven her to the Greyhound station at 4 in the morning, given her $1,200 in cash that I'd been saving for a security deposit on a better apartment, and watched her board a bus heading west. She'd promised to text me when she got somewhere safe. She'd promised to start over somewhere Kyle would never think to look for her. Kyle had just sent someone to bring her back. He'd found me, which meant he was close to finding her. "Pack tonight," I told her. "Don't wait until morning." She asked where she was supposed to go. She'd been working at a diner in Pittsburgh under a fake name, living in a room she rented week to week from someone who didn't ask questions. She'd finally started to feel like maybe she could breathe again, like maybe she could build something that didn't involve constantly looking over her shoulder. "I don't know yet," I said, "but he knows about me. He described you perfectly, including the tattoo. He's not giving up." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Annette said something that made my blood run cold. She said she wasn't running anymore. Update: I'm not running anymore. That's what Annette said to me on the phone, and I legitimately thought she'd lost her mind. I told her she didn't understand. This guy knew what she looked like. He knew about the tattoo. Kyle was actively hunting for her, and she needed to disappear again immediately. She went quiet for a second and then said she understood perfectly. She'd spent 7 months changing her hair color every 6 weeks, working cash-only jobs under fake names, sleeping in rooms rented from people who didn't ask questions. She was exhausted, she was broke, and she was done letting Kyle control her life even when he wasn't physically standing in front of her. I tried explaining that this wasn't about pride or control, this was about staying alive. But she cut me off and said she was already on the road. She'd left Pittsburgh 2 hours ago and would be at my apartment by midnight. She what? I started freaking out because if Kyle's PI had tracked her to my city, to my name specifically, then my apartment was literally the worst place she could come. But Annette said that was exactly the point. She was tired of hiding. She wanted to deal with this head-on, and she needed my help to do it. When she finally showed up, it was almost 1 in the morning, and she looked completely different from the last time I'd seen her. Her hair was shoulder-length and blonde now instead of the short dark cut she'd had when she left. She'd gained some weight back. The kind of weight you gain when you're not living in constant stress and fear. She looked healthy, strong. Nothing like the broken girl who'd shown up at my door 7 months ago. We sat in my living room and I made coffee even though neither of us needed caffeine at that hour. I needed something to do with my hands while she explained what she was thinking. She said Kyle had already taken 2 years of her life. 2 years where she couldn't see her friends without him interrogating her afterward. Couldn't work because he said it made him look bad if his girlfriend needed a job. Couldn't make any decision without his approval. She'd lost herself completely in those 2 years, and she'd spent the last 7 months trying to find herself again. She wasn't giving him any more time. "So what's your plan?" I asked. Because hoping he'll just give up and leave you alone isn't a plan, it's wishful thinking. Annette pulled out her old phone, the one she'd left behind when she ran. She said she'd been keeping the account active, paying the bill every month with a prepaid card she bought with cash. She'd never turned it on because she knew the second she did, Kyle would be able to track it. But now she wanted him to find her. On her terms, not his. I stared at her like she was speaking another language. You want to use yourself as bait? She said it wasn't bait. It was taking back control. She'd turn on the phone, let him see she was in Baltimore, and force a confrontation in a public place where he couldn't touch her without witnesses. She wanted to look him in the face and tell him she was done, that she was filing for a protective order, that if he came near her again, she'd make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of person he was. This is how people get killed, I told her. You think a piece of paper is going to stop a man who put you in the hospital twice? She looked at me with this expression I'd never seen on her before. Determined, almost fierce. She said maybe it wouldn't stop him, but at least she'd stop running. At least she'd face him on her feet instead of spending the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. I wanted to shake her. I wanted to put her back in my car and drive her somewhere even further away. But I also knew that look. I'd seen it once before. The night she'd shown up at my door deciding she was finally leaving. Once Annette made up her mind about something, there was no talking her out of it. I told her I needed to think about this, and she should get some sleep. She crashed on my couch, and I went to my bedroom, but I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about that PI standing by the dumpsters, about the way he'd smiled when I lied to him, about how he'd known exactly what Annette looked like, down to a tattoo most people wouldn't even notice. Around 7 in the morning, my phone rang. Reggie. I answered and immediately knew something was wrong from his voice. That guy came to my house, he said. My entire body went cold. What? Reggie explained that someone matching the PI's description had knocked on his door yesterday evening. When Reggie opened it, the guy had smiled all friendly and asked if he knew where his sister was. Reggie had told him I was fine and it was none of his business. The guy's smile had disappeared and he'd said he wasn't asking about me. He was asking about the girl I was helping hide from her boyfriend. Reggie had told him to get off his property. The guy had taken a step back, but before leaving, he'd mentioned that interfering with someone's relationship, helping a woman run away from her partner, could have serious consequences. Not just for me, but for my whole family. He'd made a point of mentioning that Reggie had 2 kids, 6 and 8 years old, and it would be a shame if this situation affected them. I felt like I was going to be sick. Kyle was threatening my brother's kids now. He was dragging my entire family into this because I'd helped someone escape him. Reggie was pissed. He wanted to file a police report, wanted to drive up to Baltimore immediately and help me figure this out. I told him to stay home with his family and lock his doors, and I'd call him back. When I came out of my bedroom, Annette was already awake, sitting on the couch looking at her old phone like it was a bomb. She asked if I was okay, and I told her what Reggie had said. Her face went white. This is exactly why I need to face him, she said. Because Kyle isn't going to stop. He'll keep escalating, keep threatening anyone connected to me, until he gets what he wants. The only way to end this is to confront it directly. Or you could disappear completely, I said. Change your name legally, move somewhere he'd never think to look, actually start over instead of putting yourself in danger. She stood up and started pacing around my living room. She said she'd thought about that constantly for 7 months. But running forever meant never using her real name, never having a real job with benefits or a future, never reconnecting with her own family because Kyle had convinced them she was unstable and dramatic. It meant living half a life indefinitely. She was done with that. Before I could respond, Cassandra showed up. I'd texted her the night before about Annette being here and she'd taken the morning off work to come over. When she walked in and saw both of us, she immediately asked what happened because apparently we both looked terrible. I explained everything. The PI at my building, him going to Reggie's house, Annette's plan to turn on her phone and force a confrontation with Kyle. Cassandra sat down heavily on my couch and asked if Annette had lost her mind. Finally, someone with sense, I said. But then Cassandra surprised me. She asked what Annette was planning exactly. Not whether she should do it, but how. Annette explained she wanted to meet Kyle somewhere public. Lots of people, security cameras, witnesses. She wanted to tell him face to face that she was filing for a protective order, and that if he continued harassing her or anyone connected to her, she'd go to the police with everything. Photos of her injuries from when they were together, hospital records, witness statements from neighbors who'd heard them fighting. You kept evidence? Cassandra asked. Annette nodded. She said she'd been documenting things for the last year of their relationship. Not because she'd planned to leave, but because Kyle had convinced her she was crazy, and she'd needed proof that she wasn't imagining how bad things were. She had photos on an old laptop she'd left at her mom's house. She had medical records. She had text messages where Kyle had apologized after hurting her, promising it would never happen again. So you do have leverage, Cassandra said. I interrupted and said it didn't matter how much evidence she had if Kyle showed up and killed her in a parking lot. This wasn't a legal negotiation. This was a dangerous man who didn't follow normal rules. Cassandra looked at me and said that was exactly why we needed to be there with her. Not to fight Kyle physically, but to be witnesses. To record everything. to make sure he couldn't do anything without it being documented and seen. We? I asked. She said obviously she wasn't letting Annette do this alone. If Annette was set on confronting Kyle, then we needed to make sure it happened as safely as possible. Public location, multiple witnesses, phones ready to record and call 911 if needed. I looked back and forth between them like they'd both gone insane. This is the worst idea I've ever heard. But even as I said it, I knew I wasn't going to let Annette do this alone either. She'd come to me 7 months ago because she'd had nowhere else to go. I'd helped her leave because it was the right thing to do. If she was determined to face Kyle now, I couldn't just abandon her. What followed was the most surreal planning session of my life. 3 women sitting around my coffee table on a Sunday morning trying to figure out the safest way to confront an abusive ex-boyfriend. Cassandra pulled up her laptop and started researching Maryland protective order procedures. Annette made a list of everything she had for evidence. I mostly sat there feeling like we were planning something that was going to get us all hurt, or worse. Annette wanted to do it Tuesday. Give herself 1 day to prepare mentally, then turn on her phone Monday night and send Kyle a message with a time and location. Where? Cassandra asked. We debated this for almost an hour. Mall parking lot. Too isolated in certain areas. Police station parking lot. Kyle might not show up. Restaurant. Too many civilians who could get caught in the middle if things went wrong. Finally, Cassandra suggested the giant grocery store. Huge parking lot. Constantly busy. Security cameras everywhere. Security guard usually visible near the entrance. Public enough that Kyle couldn't do anything without being seen, but not so crowded that innocent people would be in immediate danger. Annette agreed. Tuesday at 3 in the afternoon, middle of the day, lots of shoppers coming and going. I asked what she was even going to say to him. You can't just walk up and hand him legal papers, you don't even have them yet. She said she'd tell him the truth, that she was done running, that she was staying in Baltimore, that she was filing for a protective order, and if he contacted her again or came near her, she was going straight to the police with everything she had on him. She'd tell him to leave her alone and go back to Louisville. And you think he'll just agree? I asked. Annette looked at me and said no. She thought he'd be furious. She thought he'd yell and make threats and try to intimidate her like he always did. But for the first time, she'd have witnesses. She'd have people standing next to her who saw exactly how he treated her. She'd have proof that she wasn't the crazy, dramatic girlfriend he'd always told her she was. Cassandra asked if Annette's parents knew any of this. Annette's face changed and she said her parents hadn't spoken to her in almost 8 months. Kyle had called them after she left and told them she'd had some kind of breakdown, that she'd become unstable and violent, that he was worried about her mental health. Her mom had actually called her mom's sister and asked if Annette had seemed off lately, if there was a history of mental illness in the family she didn't know about. This made me even more convinced this was a terrible idea, but Annette was set on it. She turned on her old phone Monday evening while we all sat in my living room holding our breath. Within minutes, the messages started coming through. Dozens of them, all from Kyle, sent over the past 7 months. The first few were worried. Annie, where are you? I'm scared something happened. Please just let me know you're okay. Then they got angry. You can't just disappear like this. We need to talk about what you did. You're being selfish and childish. Then they turned manipulative. I know you're confused right now, but I forgive you. Come home and we'll work through this together. I miss you so much. The most recent ones from the past 2 weeks were different, colder. I know you're in Baltimore. I know who you've been talking to. You can't hide from this forever. We will talk, whether you want to or not. Annette's hands were shaking as she read through them. Then she opened a new message and typed, Giant on Reisterstown Road, Tuesday 3 p.m. Come alone and we'll talk. Don't come alone and I'm going to the police. She hit send before any of us could say anything. His response came through in less than 30 seconds. Finally ready to stop playing games? I'll be there. That was it. No questions, no negotiation, just confirmation that he'd show up. Cassandra looked at me and I looked at Annette and none of us said anything for a long minute. Then Annette turned off the phone again and said she needed to sleep. After she went to bed, Cassandra stayed for another hour. We sat in my kitchen whispering about how insane this was, how many ways it could go wrong, whether we should try harder to talk Annette out of it. But we both knew she was doing it regardless of what we said. Cassandra asked if I'd told Reggie. I said no because he'd drive up here and try to physically stop this from happening. She said maybe that wouldn't be the worst thing. I said Annette deserved to make her own choices even if they scared the hell out of us. Tuesday morning, I could barely function. I called out sick from my job because there was no way I could focus on scheduling appointments while knowing what was happening that afternoon. Annette was weirdly calm. She showered, ate breakfast, spent time going through her evidence folder making sure she had everything organized. Around 2, we all got in my car and drove to the Giant. We parked near the entrance where the security cameras had the best angle. Annette wanted to stand by the cart return area where there was open space but still lots of foot traffic. Cassandra and I positioned ourselves about 15 feet away, close enough to intervene if needed, but not so close that Kyle would immediately focus on us. At 2:55, a dark blue sedan pulled into the parking lot. Different car from the one the PI had been driving, but I knew immediately it was Kyle. He parked 3 spaces away from us and sat in his car for a minute before getting out. And that's when I saw him for the first time. He looked so normal, like someone you'd see at Target or waiting in line at Starbucks. Medium height, decent haircut, wearing jeans, and a nice button-down shirt. He smiled when he saw Annette. Actually smiled like they were old friends meeting up for coffee. He walked right up to her, and I swear to God he tried to hug her. Last update. Okay, so first, to everyone who said I should have called the cops before meeting Kyle, that we were idiots for doing this in a parking lot, that this was going to end badly. You were kind of right, but also you don't understand what it's like when someone has controlled every aspect of your friend's life for years. Annette needed this confrontation. She needed to face him on her own terms for once. So Kyle tried to hug Annette, and she stepped back so fast she almost tripped. "Don't touch me," she said, loud enough that a woman loading groceries into her car nearby actually looked over at us. Kyle put his hands up like he was surrendering, that same friendly smile still on his face. He said he just wanted to talk, that he'd been so worried about her, that he was glad she finally reached out so they could work through this like adults. The way he said it, so calm and reasonable, made my skin crawl, because I knew what he was really like. Annette told him there was nothing to work through. She was here to tell him to leave her alone, to stop sending people to harass her friends and their families, to accept that their relationship was over and had been over for 7 months. That's when his expression changed. He said 7 months where she'd completely abandoned him without explanation, made him look like a fool in front of everyone they knew, refused to answer his calls or texts like a mature person. He said he'd been patient. He'd given her space to calm down from whatever episode she'd been having, but enough was enough. Episode, Annette repeated. You put me in the hospital, Kyle. He actually laughed. Said here we go with the dramatics again, that she'd always had a flair for exaggeration. He told her she'd gotten hurt because she'd come at him during an argument, that he'd been defending himself when she fell. He said if she'd just learned to control her temper instead of getting physical whenever she was upset, none of that would have happened. I watched Annette's face and I could see her starting to doubt herself, starting to second-guess her own memories because that's what he did to her for 2 years, made her question her own reality. So I stepped forward and said we had the hospital records, we had photos, we had documentation of everything. Kyle finally looked at me directly, asked who I was again and why I was involving myself in a private conversation between him and his girlfriend. I told him Annette wasn't his girlfriend, hadn't been for 7 months, and I was involved because he'd sent someone to threaten my family. He said he hadn't threatened anyone. He'd simply hired a professional to locate his girlfriend who'd disappeared without warning. If that professional had spoken to people during his investigation, that was just standard procedure. He said I was being paranoid and dramatic, just like Annette, and maybe we'd been spending too much time together feeding each other's delusions. Cassandra spoke up then and said she'd been there too. She'd seen the bruises. She'd heard Annette crying on the phone after he'd hurt her. Kyle turned to her with this look of fake concern and asked if we'd considered that maybe Annette needed professional help, that sometimes people who are struggling mentally can be very convincing when they're telling their version of events. That's when Annette lost it. She started yelling at him right there in the parking lot, asking how he could stand there and lie like that, asking if he actually believed his own bullshit at this point. She said she had proof, photos of bruises, medical records, text messages where he'd apologized for hurting her. She said she was filing for a protective order, and if he came near her again, she'd make sure everyone in Louisville knew exactly what kind of person he was. Kyle's whole demeanor shifted then. The friendly, reasonable act completely dropped, and what was underneath was ugly. He stepped closer to her, not quite threatening, but definitely intimidating, and said she wasn't filing anything. He said if she tried to make any of this public, he'd make sure everyone knew she was unstable, that she'd abandoned her family and responsibilities, that she'd been sleeping around and lying about it. He said her own parents already thought she was having a breakdown. How hard would it be to convince everyone else? People were definitely watching us now. An older couple had stopped pushing their cart to stare. The woman who'd been loading groceries was on her phone. I couldn't tell if she was calling someone or just pretending not to eavesdrop. Annette didn't back down though. She said, "Go ahead. Tell everyone whatever you want." She was done caring what people thought. She was done letting him control her through fear and manipulation. She was done with all of it. Kyle grabbed her arm. He said they were going to go somewhere private and talk about this properly, that she was making a scene and embarrassing herself. He started trying to pull her toward his car. I didn't even think. I just moved forward and shoved him. Actually physically shoved him hard enough that he stumbled back and let go of Annette's arm. I told him to get his hands off her. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time and asked if I'd just assaulted him. Asked if I realized that was illegal, that there were witnesses, that he could have me arrested right now. Cassandra stepped between us and said actually there were witnesses to him grabbing Annette against her will, and that security cameras probably caught the whole thing. She said maybe we should go inside the store and talk to security about what just happened. Kyle said this was ridiculous, that he was trying to have a private conversation with his girlfriend and we were harassing him. He told Annette they'd finish this discussion later when she didn't have her friends interfering. Annette said no. They wouldn't finish it later because there was nothing to finish. She was staying in Baltimore, she was filing for a protective order, and if he contacted her again in any way, she was going to the police with everything she had. She said it clearly and firmly, and I was so proud of her in that moment. Kyle stared at her for a long minute. Then he said fine, if that's how she wanted to play this. He said she'd regret making an enemy out of him, that she had no idea what he was capable of when someone crossed him. He said he'd been nice so far, patient, understanding, but if she wanted to do this the hard way, they could do it the hard way. He got in his car and drove away. A security guard finally came over and asked if everything was okay, if we needed him to call the police. Cassandra explained that a man had grabbed her friend and we'd intervened. And could we please see the security footage to document what happened? The guard said he'd need to talk to his manager, but he'd seen the end of it, and he could confirm someone had grabbed someone else. We went inside and spent the next hour dealing with store security and eventually the police. A couple of officers showed up and took statements from all of us, from the security guard, from the woman who'd been on her phone. She'd actually been recording video of the whole thing and sent it to the cops. They said they couldn't arrest Kyle based on what happened, but they could file a report, and it would help Annette's case if she filed for a protective order, which she did. The next day, we went to the courthouse and Annette filed the paperwork. The clerk explained it would take a few days or weeks to process, and then there'd be a hearing where Kyle would have the opportunity to contest it. Annette said she understood and she'd be there. Now here's the part that's going to sound crazy, but I swear it's true. Someone commented asking if Kyle's family knew what he was like, and that actually made me realize something I should have thought of before. Annette had mentioned once that Kyle's mom had died when he was young and his dad had remarried. She'd met his stepmom a few times and said the woman had seemed scared of Kyle's dad, always trying to keep the peace, always apologizing for things that weren't her fault. I asked Annette about it and she went quiet. Then she said Kyle's dad used to hit his stepmom. Kyle had told her about it once when he was drunk, said his dad kept her in line and maybe that's what women needed sometimes, someone strong enough to handle them. At the time, Annette had been too scared to really process what he was saying. Now it made horrible sense. Kyle had learned this from his dad. He'd watched his father abuse his stepmother and decided that's what relationships looked like. That's what he thought was normal. This made everything feel even more impossible because how do you fight against something someone learned from childhood? How do you make someone understand that what they're doing is wrong when they literally watched their parent do the same thing their whole life? But Annette said that's exactly why she couldn't back down. Because if Kyle got away with this, if he found another girlfriend after her, he'd do the exact same thing to that person, and to the person after that. Someone had to stand up and say no, this isn't okay, this isn't normal, this ends here. The protective order hearing was set for the following week. Kyle showed up with a lawyer. An actual lawyer in a suit who immediately started talking about how this was a misunderstanding, that his client had simply been trying to communicate with his ex-girlfriend, that any physical contact had been minimal and non-threatening. He said Annette had abandoned the relationship without explanation, and Kyle had been worried about her mental health. Annette's voice shook when she spoke, but she didn't back down. She told the judge about the hospital visits, about the bruises and broken bones, about the constant surveillance and control. She submitted the photos she'd kept, the medical records, the text messages. She explained about the PI showing up at my apartment, about the threats made to my brother's family. Kyle sat there looking calm and reasonable the whole time. His lawyer kept objecting, kept trying to paint Annette as unstable and vindictive. He said she'd been struggling with mental health issues during their relationship, that Kyle had tried to get her help, that she'd refused treatment and become increasingly erratic. The judge looked at the evidence, looked at the photos of bruises in the shape of handprints, the hospital record documenting cracked ribs, asked Kyle's lawyer to explain those. The lawyer said arguments sometimes became physical when both parties lost their tempers, that his client deeply regretted any time things had escalated, but that didn't make him an abuser. He said Annette had been just as aggressive during their fights. I was sitting in the gallery next to Cassandra and I wanted to scream. The way this lawyer was twisting everything, making it sound like Annette had been equally responsible for her own abuse, was making me physically sick. But then the judge asked Kyle directly, "Did you or did you not put your hands on the petitioner in the giant parking lot last week?" Kyle said he'd touched her arm because she was being irrational and he'd been trying to calm her down. He said he'd been gentle and appropriate and her friends had completely overreacted. The judge pulled up the video on her computer, the one the woman in the parking lot had taken. She watched it twice. Then she looked at Kyle and said that didn't look like someone trying to calm anyone down. It looked like someone trying to force someone into their car against their will. She granted the protective order, temporary for now with a full hearing scheduled in 30 days, but effective immediately. Kyle was ordered to stay at least 500 feet away from Annette at all times, no contact of any kind, no third parties acting on his behalf. Kyle's lawyer started to object and the judge cut him off. She said she'd seen enough cases like this to know what she was looking at. She told Kyle that if he violated this order even once, he'd be arrested immediately. Then she asked if he understood. Kyle said yes in this cold, flat voice that made it clear he absolutely did not accept any of this. We left the courthouse and Annette actually started crying. Not sad crying, but relief crying. She kept saying she couldn't believe the judge had actually listened to her, had actually looked at the evidence and made a decision based on reality instead of Kyle's lies. I thought that would be the end of it. I really did. But 2 days later, Reggie called me. He'd been at work when he got an alert on his home security camera. Someone was in his driveway. When he pulled up the footage, it was Kyle, just standing there staring at Reggie's house. He didn't do anything, didn't approach the door or damage property. He just stood there for 3 minutes looking at the house where my brother's kids lived, then got back in his car and left. Reggie called the police immediately, showed them the footage, explained about the protective order and the threats. They said since Kyle hadn't technically violated the order, it only covered contact with Annette, not with her friend's family members. They couldn't arrest him. That's when I realized Kyle was trying to send a message. He couldn't get to Annette directly anymore, so he was making sure we all knew he could still reach the people we cared about. Annette wanted to go to the police about it, but Cassandra pointed out that we'd look like we were harassing him if we kept filing reports about things he was technically allowed to do. We needed to be smarter about this. So here's where we are now. Annette is staying with me temporarily until she can find her own place. She's working with a victim's advocate to prepare for the full protective order hearing next month. She's been applying for jobs under her real name for the first time in months. She's slowly starting to rebuild a life that isn't defined by running or hiding. Kyle hasn't contacted her directly since the courthouse, but he's been liking old photos on social media accounts. Mutual friends from Louisville who still follow both of them. Just enough to remind her he's still watching. Still there. We're all just waiting to see what Kyle does next. And the thing that keeps me up at night is knowing that the protective order is just paper. It doesn't actually physically prevent Kyle from doing anything. It just means he'll face consequences if he does. But consequences only matter if you're alive to see them enforced. Edit. Someone in the comments asked if this is really over, and honestly, I don't know. I want to believe Kyle will eventually move on, find someone else to obsess over, leave Annette alone. But I also know men like him don't just give up when they lose control of something they think belongs to them.
I paid a DNA lab to test my son's paternity, and they called the FBI instead of giving me results. The woman on the phone identified herself as Dr. Caroline Fisher from GeneTech Labs, and her voice had a tightness that immediately told me something was wrong. Mr. Brennan, I'm calling about the paternity test you submitted 9 days ago. Sample ID 8842JKL. We need you to come to our facility immediately. Don't discuss this call with anyone. The FBI is en route to speak with you. My hand went numb around my phone. The FBI? I'd submitted a simple paternity test because my 3-year-old son Ethan looked nothing like me or my wife Melissa, because doubt had been eating me alive for 3 years, because I needed to know if my marriage was built on lies. What could the FBI possibly want with a paternity test? Dr. Fisher's voice cut through my panic. Mr. Brennan, I need you to confirm you submitted samples for yourself and for a child named Ethan Brennan, age 3 years, 2 months. I confirmed it, my voice barely working. What's going on? Is something wrong with the results? There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was lower, almost frightened. Mr. Brennan, your son's DNA is flagged in multiple federal databases. The moment we ran his profile, our system triggered automatic alerts to the FBI, Homeland Security, and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. I've never seen this happen in 15 years of running this lab. You need to get here now. I drove to GeneTech Labs in a haze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. Flagged in federal databases? Ethan was 3 years old. He'd been born at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, had a birth certificate, a social security number, pediatric records. He'd never been missing or exploited. He spent his days at a Montessori preschool, learning colors and shapes and how to share toys with other kids. The only unusual thing about him was that he didn't look like either of his parents, which was why I'd ordered the damn test in the first place. I'd suspected Melissa had an affair. I'd imagined confronting her, imagined divorce lawyers and custody battles and the humiliation of raising another man's child. But federal databases? Missing children? That was something else entirely. My mind spun through impossible scenarios. Had Melissa stolen him from somewhere? Had there been a hospital mix-up? Was Ethan not who I thought he was? The lab was in a bland office park in Schaumburg, and when I pulled into the parking lot, I saw 2 black SUVs with government plates parked near the entrance. My mouth went dry. This was real. Whatever was happening, it was serious enough for federal agents to respond within hours. Inside, the receptionist, who'd been so professionally pleasant when I'd picked up my test kit, now looked at me like I was radioactive. She didn't speak, just pointed to a conference room where Dr. Fisher waited with 3 people in dark suits. 2 men and a woman, all wearing visitor badges clipped to their jackets, all with the kind of alert, assessing expressions that law enforcement develops after years of interviewing suspects. Dr. Fisher was in her 50s, gray hair pulled back in a bun, wearing a white lab coat over business casual clothes. She looked shaken, like someone who'd stumbled into something far bigger than she'd signed up for. "Mr. Brennan, these are Special Agents Kowalski, Delacroix, and Huang from the FBI. They need to ask you some questions about your son." Agent Kowalski, the older of the 2 men, gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Mr. Brennan. We need to understand how you came to be in possession of this child." In possession? The phrasing made Ethan sound like stolen property, like something I'd acquired illegally. "I'm his father," I said, but my voice came out uncertain, questioning. Was I? What had the DNA test shown before the FBI got involved? Agent Kowalski pulled out a tablet and turned it toward me, showing a photograph of a young woman, maybe 25 years old, with long dark hair and delicate features. "Do you recognize this woman?" I'd never seen her before in my life. I told them that, and Agent Delacroix, the woman, leaned forward. Her name was Natasha Volkov. She was a Russian national who entered the United States on a student visa 6 years ago. She disappeared 4 years ago from a university in Boston. 3 months later, her body was found in an industrial park outside Philadelphia. She'd been dead for approximately 8 weeks when discovered. Cause of death was manual strangulation. She was 4 months pregnant when she died. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table. What does this have to do with my son? Agent Huang, who'd been silent until now, spoke in a careful, measured tone. "Your son's DNA is a familial match to Natasha Volkov. According to our analysis, there's a 99.7% probability that she was his biological mother, which means your son is the child she was carrying when she was murdered, which means someone cut that child out of her body, kept him alive, and somehow placed him in your custody. We need to know how that happened, Mr. Brennan. We need to know everything about how you came to have this child." My vision was tunneling. I thought I might vomit. Melissa. Oh God, Melissa. What had she done? I told them everything, my voice shaking, my hands pressed flat against the conference table to stop them from trembling. Melissa and I had been married for 5 years when she got pregnant, or when she claimed she got pregnant. We'd been trying for 2 years with no success. Fertility treatments, ovulation tracking, the whole humiliating process. Then one day she told me she was pregnant, showed me a positive pregnancy test, started exhibiting all the normal symptoms, morning sickness, fatigue, food cravings. I'd been so happy I hadn't questioned anything. She'd gained weight, her belly had grown, she'd complained about back pain and swollen ankles. We'd prepared a nursery, taken birthing classes, read parenting books. At 8 months, she'd told me she wanted to deliver at a birthing center instead of a hospital. Said she wanted a more natural experience, that hospitals were too clinical and cold. I'd supported her decision. I'd trusted her completely. She'd gone into labor on a Sunday morning, and I'd driven her to the birthing center in Aurora, a small facility run by certified midwives. They'd sent me to the waiting room, said she wanted privacy during delivery, that some women preferred not to have their partners present. I'd waited for 6 hours, pacing and anxious, until a midwife came out holding a tiny bundle and said, "Congratulations, you have a son." I'd held Ethan for the first time in that waiting room, this impossibly small human with dark curly hair and a scrunched up face, and I'd fallen in love instantly. I'd never questioned where he came from. He was my son, except he wasn't. Agent Kowalski wrote down the name of the birthing center, the date, every detail I could remember. "We'll need to speak with your wife immediately. Where is she now?" She was at home with Ethan. It was Thursday afternoon, and she'd have picked him up from preschool an hour ago. They were probably in the living room right now, Ethan playing with his trucks while Melissa made dinner, living their normal life while I sat in this conference room learning that nothing about our family was real. "Before we bring her in," Agent Delacroix said, and her voice had gentled slightly, like she recognized I was in shock. "I need to ask you something. Did you ever suspect anything was wrong? Any indication that she wasn't actually pregnant? Any sign that Ethan wasn't biologically yours?" I thought about the past 3 years, searching my memory for red flags I'd missed. Melissa had been protective of Ethan from the beginning, sometimes obsessively so. She'd homeschooled him for the first 2 years, only agreeing to preschool when I'd insisted he needed socialization. She'd been paranoid about pediatrician visits, always wanting to be present, always asking detailed questions about what information got recorded where. She'd been resistant to family photos, to posting anything about Ethan on social media. I thought she was just being cautious, that maybe she had postpartum anxiety. Now I understood she'd been hiding him, hiding evidence of a child who shouldn't exist. Agent Huang pulled up another image on his tablet. A crime scene photo I wish I'd never seen. Natasha Volkov's body, decomposed and horrific, lying in dirt and debris. The autopsy showed evidence of a crude cesarean section. Whoever cut this child out of her used a non-sterile blade, likely a hunting knife. The incision was jagged, unprofessional. She was probably still alive when it happened, though hopefully unconscious from strangulation. The baby was removed, the umbilical cord cut with the same blade. Based on fetal development, the child would have been viable, approximately 32 weeks gestation. But keeping a premature infant alive outside a hospital requires significant medical knowledge or equipment. We never found the baby. Until now. I ran to the trash can in the corner and vomited. The agents waited patiently while I emptied my stomach, while I tried to process that the child I'd raised for 3 years, the boy I'd taught to ride a tricycle and count to 10 and say please and thank you, had been cut from his murdered mother's body. Someone had killed Natasha Volkov, stolen her unborn child, and somehow convinced my wife to help deliver that child to me as if he were ours. Or Melissa had done it herself. The thought made me vomit again. Could my wife be a murderer? Could the woman I'd shared a bed with for 8 years be capable of strangling a pregnant woman and cutting out her baby? Agent Kowalski's phone rang. He stepped out of the conference room to take the call, and when he came back, his expression was grim. Local police are at your residence. Your wife isn't there. Neighbors reported seeing her leave approximately 45 minutes ago with a child matching your son's description and 2 large suitcases. She was driving a vehicle registered to her maiden name, a car you didn't know she owned. She's running, Mr. Brennan. She knew you'd submitted that DNA test, and she knew what would happen when the results came back. My chest tightened. How had she known? I'd been so careful, had submitted the test while she was out, had used a credit card she didn't have access to, unless she'd been monitoring me somehow. Unless she'd been waiting for this moment for 3 years, had contingency plans in place, had always known I'd eventually figure out the truth. Agent Delacroix pulled out her phone. We're issuing an Amber Alert for Ethan Brennan. Age 3, dark curly hair, brown eyes, approximately 35 pounds. Last seen with Melissa Brennan, age 34, auburn hair, green eyes, 5'6". Vehicle description coming through now. Mr. Brennan, I need you to think very carefully. Does your wife have any properties we don't know about? Any friends or family who might hide her? Anywhere she might run? I tried to think through the panic. Melissa's parents were dead, had died in a car accident when she was 19. She was an only child. Her friends were mostly other preschool moms, suburban women. I couldn't imagine helping her evade federal authorities, unless those relationships were as fake as everything else, unless her entire life had been constructed specifically for this moment. Her maiden name, I said. You said the car was registered to her maiden name. What was it? Agent Huang checked his notes. Volkov. Melissa Volkov before she married you and became Melissa Brennan. The room went cold. Volkov. The same last name as the murdered woman. They're related, I said, my voice hollow. Natasha and Melissa. They have to be related. Agent Kowalski was already on his phone, barking orders to someone. Within minutes, they had the information. Natasha Volkov had an older sister, 5 years older, who'd immigrated to the United States 2 years before Natasha. Her name was Irina Volkov. She'd changed her name legally 7 years ago to Melissa Volkov, which meant my wife wasn't just involved in Natasha's murder. My wife was Natasha's sister. She'd stolen her own sister's baby and passed him off as mine. The agents moved fast after that. APBs, highway patrol alerts, airport security notifications. They pulled up photos of Irina Volkov from her immigration records, and I stared at the woman I'd thought I knew. She looked different in those old photos. Harder, thinner, her hair darker. But it was definitely her. Definitely the woman I'd married. The woman I'd trusted with my life. The woman who'd been lying to me since the day we met. Agent Delacroix sat across from me, while the others coordinated the manhunt. I need you to understand something, Mr. Brennan. You're not under arrest. Based on what you've told us, you appear to be a victim here. But we need your full cooperation. Anything you remember, no matter how small, could help us find your son before she disappears with him completely. My son. Was he still my son? Biologically, no. I'd just learned he had no genetic connection to me whatsoever. But I'd raised him. I'd been there for every milestone, every fever, every scraped knee. I'd read him bedtime stories and taught him to swim and held him when he had nightmares. Did that count for nothing? Did biology erase 3 years of love? Agent Huang must have seen something in my face because his expression softened marginally. The child is a victim too. He's been living with the woman who murdered his biological mother. Whatever Irina's planning, it won't end well for him. We need to find him. They kept me at the lab for hours, asking questions, recording statements, building a timeline. Irina had entered the country on a work visa, had been employed as a home health aide for elderly patients. She'd met me at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park 5 years ago, a seemingly random encounter that I now understood had been carefully orchestrated. She'd researched me, targeted me specifically. Why? What had made me useful? Agent Kowalski had theories. You're financially stable, no criminal record, respected in your community. You're an architect, which means flexible schedule and the ability to work from home sometimes. You're a good cover for a woman who needed to hide a child. She used you to create a false identity for Ethan, to get him a birth certificate and social security number, to make him legitimate in the system. She needed a normal American family to hide behind. I felt sick. Every moment of our relationship had been a manipulation. The coffee shop meeting, the dates, the romance, the proposal. She'd never loved me. She'd been using me from day one as cover for a stolen child. But why steal her own sister's baby? What kind of person murders their sibling and takes their child? The answer came from FBI databases. Natasha Volkov had been in a relationship with a man named Dmitry Kuznetsov, a Russian national with suspected ties to organized crime. He'd been under FBI surveillance for money laundering and weapons trafficking. When Natasha disappeared, Dmitry had disappeared too, had fled back to Russia before he could be questioned. The FBI had suspected he was involved in her murder, but had never been able to prove it. Agent Delacroix pulled up surveillance photos of Dmitry, and my stomach dropped again. I'd seen him before. 2 years ago, Irina had insisted we take a vacation to Miami Beach, said she needed sun and relaxation. We'd left Ethan with a babysitter, something she rarely agreed to, and spent 4 days at a beachfront hotel. One afternoon, while I was swimming, I'd come back to our hotel room and found Irina on the balcony talking to a man. She'd said he was an old friend from Russia, that they'd bumped into each other by chance. The man had left quickly when I appeared, and I'd thought nothing of it. That man was Dmitry Kuznetsov. Irina had met with her dead sister's boyfriend, the prime suspect in her sister's murder, which meant she knew what had happened to Natasha, which meant she was either complicit in the murder or had killed Natasha herself. Agent Kowalski leaned forward when I told him about the Miami meeting. Did you hear any of their conversation? Any indication what they discussed? I'd heard fragments through the sliding glass door. They'd been speaking Russian, which Irina had told me she'd forgotten after years in America. Another lie. I'd heard her say Ethan's name several times. I'd heard Dmitry's voice getting louder, angry. I'd heard Irina say something that sounded like money in English. Then I'd slid the door open, and the conversation had ended. Agent Huang made a phone call, spoke in rapid technical jargon I didn't understand, then turned back to us. We've tracked Melissa's phone. It's pinging off a tower near the Indiana border, heading east. She's on I-80, probably aiming for Pennsylvania or New York. We've got state police moving to intercept. I stood up, my legs shaky. I need to be there when you find him. I need to see Ethan. Agent Delacroix shook her head. That's not possible. This is an active federal investigation and a potential hostage situation. We can't have civilians present. He knows me, I insisted. If you corner her, if this turns into a standoff, Ethan's going to be terrified. He needs to see a familiar face. Let me help. They consulted quietly among themselves. Then Agent Kowalski nodded reluctantly. You can ride with us, but you stay in the vehicle until we secure the scene. No heroics, no interference. If you compromise this operation, I'll have you arrested for obstruction. Understood? I understood. We piled into one of the black SUVs, and Agent Delacroix drove while Kowalski coordinated with state police on his phone. I sat in the back next to Agent Huang, watching the suburbs give way to industrial areas, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. Somewhere ahead of us, Irina was driving with Ethan, running from the life she'd built and the lies she'd told. What was she thinking right now? What was her endgame? You don't murder someone, steal their child, and maintain an elaborate deception for 3 years without having a plan. The call came through 40 minutes later. Indiana State Police had eyes on the vehicle, a silver Subaru Outback matching the description. They were holding back, maintaining distance, waiting for FBI to coordinate the stop. We were 20 miles behind them, pushing 90 miles per hour on the interstate. Agent Kowalski briefed the team on the ground. Suspect is considered armed and dangerous. Child is in the vehicle, age 3. Do not engage in any way that might endanger the child. We need her stopped, but we need the kid safe. Armed and dangerous. Did Irina have a gun? Had she been armed this whole time while living in our house, while sleeping beside me, while playing with Ethan in our backyard? How much of the woman I'd known was real, and how much was tactical calculation? We caught up to the surveillance team just as the sun set completely. Through the front windshield, I could see Irina's Subaru 3 cars ahead, could see the distinctive car seat in the back window where Ethan would be strapped in, probably confused about why Mommy had picked him up early and packed suitcases and was driving somewhere without Daddy. State police had set up a roadblock 5 miles ahead. The plan was to funnel traffic to a single lane, slow everyone down, then block the road completely and box her in. Standard procedure. Clean, controlled, minimal risk to civilians. It didn't go according to plan. Somehow Irina spotted the roadblock before we got there. Maybe she saw the flashing lights in the distance, or maybe she'd been listening to police scanners, expecting this. She swerved suddenly, crossing 3 lanes of traffic and taking an exit at the last second. Cars honked and braked, our SUV followed, and suddenly we were in a high-speed pursuit through rural Indiana backroads. Agent Delacroix was on the radio. Suspect has left the interstate. We're on County Road 400. Request aerial support. A helicopter would take time to scramble. We didn't have time. Irina was driving like someone with nothing to lose, taking curves too fast, blowing through stop signs. I braced myself against the door, terrified we'd crash, more terrified that she'd crash with Ethan in the car. How could she do this? How could she endanger him like this? Unless she'd never really loved him. Unless he'd always been just a means to an end. But what end? What was worth murdering your own sister? We followed her for 15 minutes through increasingly rural roads, farmland and forest on both sides. Then her brake lights flashed, and she turned sharply onto a dirt road that led into dense woods. Our SUV followed, bouncing over ruts and potholes. Where was she going? This was the middle of nowhere. There was nothing out here except trees and darkness. The dirt road ended at a clearing with a small cabin, the kind of hunting lodge that wealthy people use once or twice a year. Irina's car skidded to a stop, and she was out immediately, opening the back door and pulling Ethan from his car seat. Our SUV stopped 50 yards back, and all 3 agents drew their weapons. "Irina Volkov, FBI, put the child down and put your hands in the air." She didn't put him down. She held Ethan against her chest like a shield and backed toward the cabin. Ethan was crying, his little face pressed against her shoulder, his arms wrapped around her neck. He was wearing his favorite blue shirt with dinosaurs on it, the one he'd insisted on wearing every day this week. He looked so small, so vulnerable. I started to open the car door, and Agent Huang grabbed my arm. "Stay here. She's unstable. She could have a weapon." Irina reached the cabin's porch and turned to face us. In the headlights from both vehicles, I could see her face clearly. She looked wild, desperate, nothing like the composed woman I'd lived with. She was shouting something, but I couldn't hear over Ethan's crying. Agent Kowalski used a megaphone. "Irina, you're surrounded. There's no way out of this. Put Ethan down and we can talk. Nobody has to get hurt." She disappeared into the cabin with Ethan, slamming the door. Within seconds, the cabin's lights came on. This wasn't random. She'd been here before, had prepared this place as a fallback location. How long had she been planning for this moment? Agent Delacroix was coordinating with the tactical team that was en route. 20 minutes out, maybe less. We had to keep Irina contained, keep her talking, keep Ethan safe until professionals arrived. Agent Kowalski approached the cabin slowly, hands visible, weapon holstered. "Irina, I know you can hear me. Let's talk about what you want. Let's figure out how to end this safely." A window broke, glass shattering outward, and Irina's voice came through. "You don't understand. None of you understand. He's my nephew, my sister's son. I saved him." Saved him? She'd cut him out of her murdered sister's womb. That wasn't saving, that was desecration. Unless her version of events was different than ours. Unless there was something we didn't know. Agent Kowalski kept his voice calm. "Then help us understand. Tell us what happened with Natasha. Tell us how Ethan came to be in your custody. We want to hear your side." There was a long silence. Then Irina's voice again, raw with emotion. "Dmitri killed her. My sister was pregnant with his child, and when she tried to leave him, when she said she'd go to the police about his criminal activities, he strangled her. I found her body before anyone else did. She was dead, but the baby was still alive inside her. I could feel him moving. I had worked as a home health aide. I knew basic medical procedures. I had equipment, had supplies. I did the only thing I could do. I saved my nephew from dying with his mother. I kept him alive, and then I found a way to give him a real life, a normal family, a future. I did what I had to do." Agent Huang was recording everything on his phone. This was a confession, whether Irina realized it or not. She'd admitted to performing an unauthorized post-mortem cesarean, to concealing a death, to falsifying documents to create Ethan's fake identity. Even if her story about Dmitri was true, she'd committed multiple felonies. And if she'd been involved in Natasha's murder itself, this was all misdirection. Agent Kowalski tried again. "Irina, I believe you wanted to save the baby, but you need to let him go now. He needs medical attention, needs to be evaluated, and you need to come out and tell us everything you know about Dmitri Kuznetsov. Help us bring your sister's real killer to justice." Another long silence. I watched the cabin's windows, looking for any sign of Ethan, any indication he was okay. Then I saw movement in one of the windows. A small face, dark curly hair pressed against the glass. Ethan. He was looking out at the vehicles, at the lights, probably confused and scared. He saw me, even at this distance. I knew the moment he recognized me. His mouth opened, probably calling Daddy, though I couldn't hear him. Irina appeared behind him, pulling him away from the window. The next voice that came from the cabin wasn't Irina's. It was a man's, heavily accented, speaking English. "FBI, you will back away from this cabin. You will provide vehicle with full fuel tank. You will guarantee safe passage to O'Hare Airport, or I will kill woman and child both." Dmitri Kuznetsov was inside. He'd been here the whole time, waiting. This had been his plan, not Irina's. She'd led us here deliberately. Agent Kowalski swore under his breath. This just became a hostage situation with an international fugitive. Protocol had to change. Negotiation had to shift. Everything just got infinitely more complicated. Agent Delacroix was on her phone, escalating to her superiors, requesting the full tactical team immediately. Agent Huang moved to the back of the SUV, started pulling out heavier equipment, body armor, rifles, night vision. This wasn't going to end peacefully. I couldn't sit in the car anymore. I opened the door and got out before Agent Huang could stop me. I walked toward the cabin, hands raised, voice loud enough to carry. Dimitri, my name is David Brennan. I'm Ethan's father. Let me talk to him. Let me make sure he's okay. Agent Kowalski hissed at me to get back, but I ignored him. The cabin door opened slightly, and Dimitri's face appeared in the gap. He was in his 40s, thick, dark hair, cold eyes that assessed me like a predator evaluating prey. You are not father. You are nothing. You are man she used for papers, for legitimacy. Boy is Natasha's son, my son. He belongs to Russia, to his blood. He belongs to himself, I said, taking another step forward. He's 3 years old. He doesn't understand any of this. Whatever issues you have with the FBI, whatever you're running from, he doesn't deserve to be in the middle of it. Let him go. Keep Irina as leverage if you need a hostage, but let Ethan go. Dimitri laughed, harsh and bitter. You think I trust FBI? You think they let me walk away if I release Boy? No. Boy is my guarantee. My blood. He comes with me or he dies with me. Those are only options. Behind him, I heard Ethan crying, calling for me. Daddy, I want Daddy. The sound tore something inside my chest. Agent Kowalski was beside me now, trying to pull me back. Mr. Brennan, you need to stand down. You're making this worse. But Dimitri was looking at me with something like curiosity. You love him, the boy who is not yours. You would die for him, yes? I didn't hesitate. Yes. Then prove it. Come inside. Substitute yourself for Boy. You stay as hostage, he goes free. This is trade I offer. Agent Kowalski grabbed my arm hard. Absolutely not. We don't negotiate with hostage takers. We don't trade civilians. But I was already moving forward. The tactical team was 20 minutes out. In 20 minutes, Dimitri might panic, might hurt Ethan, might turn this into a bloodbath. If I could get Ethan out now, safely, nothing else mattered. Not my safety, not my life. He was my son in every way that counted. Biology was irrelevant. I'm coming in, I called to Dimitri. Let Ethan come out first, then I'll enter. You'll have your hostage. Dimitri considered, then nodded. The cabin door opened wider, and Irina appeared, holding Ethan. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Regret? Gratitude? Fear? She walked Ethan across the clearing and stopped 10 feet from the vehicles. Ethan was reaching for me, crying, saying my name over and over. Irina set him down and he ran to me. I dropped to my knees and caught him, holding him so tight he squeaked. He was warm and solid and alive, his little heart racing against my chest. Daddy, I was scared. Why did Mommy take me away? Why are there police cars? I want to go home. I looked at Agent Delacroix, who'd moved forward quickly. Take him, I said, passing Ethan to her. He clung to me, not wanting to let go, but I peeled his arms away gently. You're going to go with this nice lady. She's going to take you somewhere safe. I'll see you soon, buddy. I promise. It was a lie. I had no idea if I'd see him again, but I needed him to feel safe, to not be more traumatized than he already was. Agent Delacroix carried Ethan back to the SUV and he screamed for me the whole way. The sound would haunt me forever, but he was safe. That was all that mattered. I turned back to the cabin, and Dimitri gestured with a gun I hadn't seen before. Now you come in. Slow. Hands where I see them. I walked forward, each step feeling surreal. Behind me, I heard Agent Kowalski on the radio, explaining what was happening, probably getting screamed at by his superiors. The FBI didn't like civilians making executive decisions, but I'd gotten Ethan out. Whatever happened now, he was safe. I stepped into the cabin, and Dimitri closed the door behind me. Inside was a single room, sparsely furnished. Hunting gear, a table, some chairs. Irina sat in one corner, her face in her hands, sobbing. She'd been crying the entire time. Dimitri pushed me toward a chair and zip-tied my hands behind my back. Then he pressed the gun against the back of my head. Now we wait. We waited for 3 hours. The tactical team arrived, set up perimeter, assessed the situation. A negotiator tried to establish communication, a woman with a calm voice speaking through a megaphone, asking Dimitri what he wanted, what it would take to end this peacefully. Dimitri's demands were impossible. Safe passage out of the country, immunity from prosecution, access to bank accounts that had been frozen by federal authorities, things the FBI would never agree to. As the night wore on, Dimitri got more agitated. He paced, waved the gun around, shouted in Russian at Irina, who'd stopped crying and now sat silent and empty-looking. I tried to stay calm, to not provoke him, tried to think about Ethan safely away from here, tried to imagine him being placed with social services, evaluated by doctors, eventually maybe returned to me if I survived this, if I was deemed a fit parent, despite not being biologically related, if the system decided love mattered more than DNA. Around midnight, Irina finally spoke. Dimitri, this is over. They will not let you leave. They will wait you out. And when you become desperate, you will kill us both, and then yourself. That is how this ends. Let him go. Let David go. He is innocent in this. Keep only me. I am the one who wronged you. Dimitri turned on her, his face twisted with rage. You wronged me? You saved my son. You took him after you killed Natasha and you gave him a life. You think I don't know? You think I am stupid? My breath stopped. Killed Natasha. Irina had killed her own sister. Not Dimitri. Irina. She stood up slowly, her voice hollow. She was going to take him from you. She was going to disappear with your child, and you would never find them. She was going to destroy everything you built. I did what you wanted but didn't have courage to do yourself. I saved you, and then I saved your son. Dimitri's gun swung between us, his hand shaking. I did not ask you to kill her. I loved her. She was mother of my child. You loved your criminal empire more, Irina spat. You loved your money, your power, your reputation. You would have chosen all of that over her. So I chose for you, and I protected your son because Natasha was my sister and I owed her that much. The gun was against her forehead now. Dimitri's finger on the trigger, his face contorted with grief and rage and something that might have been guilt. You destroyed everything. Yes, Irina said quietly. I did, and I would do it again to protect him. That boy is all that remains of Natasha. He is all that matters. The window exploded inward. Tactical team, flashbangs, smoke, chaos. I threw myself sideways off the chair, hitting the floor hard, my hands still zip-tied behind me. Gunfire, close and deafening. Shouting, boots on wood. Someone grabbed me, dragged me toward the door. I couldn't see anything through the smoke, couldn't hear anything but ringing. Outside, they cut the zip ties and pulled me away from the cabin. Paramedics appeared, checking me over, asking questions I couldn't process. Behind me, agents were bringing out bodies. Dimitri first, a sheet over his face, dead. Then Irina, also covered, also dead. The tactical team had taken both of them out in the initial breach. Clean shots, no hesitation. Agent Kowalski found me sitting on the bumper of an ambulance, wrapped in a shock blanket despite not being cold. Mr. Brennan, are you injured? I shook my head. I wasn't injured. I was destroyed, but not injured. Ethan, where is he? Safe. He's at a children's hospital in Indianapolis being evaluated. He's physically fine, no injuries. Psychologically, he'll need time, but he's asking for you. Agent Huang approached, his expression somber. We recovered Dimitri's phone. He's been in contact with associates in Russia who were planning to help him flee the country with Ethan. There was money involved, a lot of money. Irina had been stealing from Dimitri for years, siphoning funds from his accounts, using Ethan as leverage. That's why she met with Dimitri in Miami. She was blackmailing him. Pay her or she'd turn him in. But eventually, he'd had enough and came for his son. Agent Delacroix handed me her phone, showing photos they'd found in the cabin. Pictures of Natasha, pregnant and smiling, unaware her sister was planning to murder her. Pictures of Irina performing the cesarean in what looked like a garage or warehouse, her hands bloody, a tiny premature infant in her arms. Pictures of Ethan as a newborn, hooked to medical equipment that Irina must have stolen from hospitals. She'd kept him alive for 3 months before approaching me, before starting her elaborate seduction, before building the lie that would become our life. Will I be able to see him? I asked. Will they let me be part of his life? Agent Kowalski sat beside me. That's complicated. Legally, you have no parental rights. Ethan's biological mother is dead, his biological father is dead, and the woman who raised him for 3 years was his aunt who murdered his mother. There's no precedent for this. Child Services will have to determine what's in his best interest. You'll need a lawyer. You'll need to fight for custody. But you saved his life tonight. That counts for something. It had to count for everything. Because I'd already lost Melissa, lost my marriage, lost my identity as Ethan's biological father. I couldn't lose Ethan himself. He was the only real thing left. 6 months later, after lawyers and social workers and psychological evaluations and court hearings that felt endless, I was granted full custody of Ethan. The judge ruled that biological connection was less important than the bond we'd formed, that removing him from the only father he'd ever known would cause more harm than good. Ethan calls me daddy. He doesn't understand the complicated truth of his origin, and maybe he never will. We live in a new house now, somewhere the memories can't reach us. And every night when I tuck him into his bed and he says, I love you, Daddy, I know that DNA doesn't make a family. Love does. That's the only truth that matters. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.